this is a very compact planning. It is just 3 hours, and we are trying to cover so many things. So what we thought that we'll just emphasize on the major uh, key issues in conduct of clinical research, with a little emphasis on more on the ethical issues, because as I understand, primarily this is actually for the members of the ethics committees. Okay, although there are other stakeholders who are also equally important, as Dr. Shambo will be discussing, whether the role of the investigators, role of the regulators, role of the industry sponsor, or even in case of an academic research, so how that is governed, etc. But then what we thought, the sequence that Dr. Shambo has right now shared, so we'll be going by this. The last session will be kind of sharing experience, how a trial, uh, sponsored clinical trial or an industry sponsored new drug clinical trial, how it happens in the site. Okay, sequentially, what are the different activities? So that will be discussed based on our experience of conducting clinical trials. So that's how we have thought of. And time may not be permitting for a thorough interactions to be possible, but I would request all of you, when the sessions are going on, if you also at the same time, if any question raised, or if there is something which needs further discussion, you can just type it in the chat box. If not possible during this 3 hour time, we'll try to provide you the responses maybe in the next 3-4 days, or at best within the next 1 week time. And after that, we'll also take about a week time to provide you the certificate. Okay, within a week's time you will get the certificate. So that's how we have planned the interaction. We would say that instead of within these 3 hours, it will be protracted for the next 4-5 days, when uh, you can ask questions into this WhatsApp group. I think you all have access to InnovoCare WhatsApp group. So there you can give your questions, and we'll try to respond to them to the best of our ability. With these few words, looking forward to a very effective sessions ahead. I now leave it to Dr. Shambo and request him to start with the first presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So we'll talk about good clinical practice, and for next 40 to 40 minutes, this area we will try to cover. That is to understand the definition of GCP, to know the evolution of good clinical practice, and finally, we'll try to explain the principles of good clinical practice. So first of all, what is good clinical practice? So there is one word, research is not there in GCP, but it is actually a good clinical research practice. And by definition, it is a standard for the design, conduct, performance, monitoring, auditing, recording, analysis, and reporting of the clinical trials. The purpose is to provide assurance that the data and reported results are credible and accurate. And number two, the rights, integrity, and confidentiality of the trial subjects are protected. So good clinical practice or good clinical research practice, it is a standard for every steps of clinical trials or clinical research, which provides two assurance. Number one, credible, accurate results, and number two, the subject's rights, the participants' rights, integrity, and confidentiality. So WHO came up with another type of definition, but they have the similar type of meaning. WHO defined GCP as a standard for clinical studies which encompasses the design, conduct, monitoring, termination, audit, analysis, reporting, and documentation of the studies, and which ensures that the studies are scientifically and ethically sound, and the clinical properties of the pharmaceutical product that could be diagnostic, therapeutic, or prophylactic under investigation are properly documented. So actually how this good clinical practice, there is evolution. They evolute due to some atrocities. So atrocities are just like the hammer which comes out on the knee joint in the patellar tendon, and after that what happened, the knee jerks happens. So there are some ethical principles evolved or developed. So first of all, you can see this picture where the Nazi war crimes, you can see the this is the lady who was exposed to extremes of temperatures. So this is they are exposed to -30, -40 degrees Celsius to check how the temperature causes changes in their physiology, and they document that until these participants dies. So these are the first times these were like horrible experiments. Next, we know about that Tuskegee syphilis trial. What is that? There are some Negro people in America. So they were prisoners. So the prisoners who were Negro, they were, when suffered from syphilis, actually they were not given any treatment. So only the natural history, natural course of disease of syphilis was observed, and that was studied. And another arm who were not Negroes, they were given the drug known as penicillin. So this trial was started at around 1936, and it was all continued up to 1970s, like that. So long time this type of unethical research happened. Next come this lady, you can see, she is Kelsey, and this is the president, American President Kennedy, who was feliciting Kelsey. So Kelsey was the main lady in the FDA who had stopped the entry of thalidomide in America. So we know that in 1950s, thalidomide was used as an anti-nausea pill, and it was commonly used in pregnant ladies. And what happened? The next gentleman, the McBride, Austrian physician, who had seen the cases of phocomelia. So he had observed that, he had reported that, but when the drugs going to entry in the American market, this lady Kelsey stopped that because she found something which is very much concerning against thalidomide, and she prevented its entry in the America. And after this disaster, what happened? American drug regulations seen a historical change, and that was also known as Kefauver-Harris Amendment, which ensures that every drugs when entering into some country like America, they should have a good level of evidence in all levels, starting from the animal studies to human studies. Next is the Jewish chronic disease trial, where what happened? Some cells, some tissues from the cancer patients were collected, and those were injected into healthy persons who were Jews. This was also done in America to see how the natural immunity defends against those cancer cells. So again, this is a horrible trial, and this was again reported too. Next is Willowbrook Study. So what is that Willowbrook Study? Willowbrook is a school for mentally disabled persons. So what happened? There was some physician who had taken those mentally disabled students as the study participants, where they try to see the natural course of hepatitis A. So the patients were not given any treatment, or the students who has high chance to be infected with hepatitis A, they were never informed that you have a chance to get hepatitis A, and they give they just study the natural course and how the hepatitis A transmit from one to another. So again, this is a unethical study. The question of vulnerability arises. So this is again a very critical study that done in US, New York. Another is the Milgram study, which is I think very known to different psychologists, psychiatrists. So here again, the participants were never informed that they are actually participants. They were intended like that they are the observer, or they are there are some other persons who are actually the participants. They thought that, but actually their psychological expressions were taken, and that was recorded. And this is little bit a cruel study. So this is the Milgram study, which again raised some ethical issues. So this was in 1964. After starting from 1940s, when they had seen this, that cancer study, that means that Jewish cancer study, they had reported it. So yes, there are sins of omissions, the cancer research without consent. So without informed consent, one study was ongoing. And this is the Willowbrook State School, as already we had mentioned, that again for the mentally disabled students, where the hepatitis A, the natural course of hepatitis A was seen without informing the patients or the other school students that you are having the higher chance to get hepatitis A. They just see how this hepatitis A evolution happens in their system. So as I had mentioned, with every hammering, there is a knee-jerk response, and these all the ethical principles that happened after the Nazi war crime. There was Nuremberg Code in 1949. Then in 1964, World Medical Association came up with this Declaration of Helsinki. Both these declarations or code give emphasis on freely given informed consent. Then coming to a very important, after this Jewish cancer model or cancer study, or that the specific studies on Tuskegee syphilis study, this Belmont report came up, and they had given or they had opened up a new horizon in the arena of ethics in clinical research. And finally, the Council of International Organization of Medical Sciences, or CIOMS, in 1993 came up with the different types of GCP principles. So coming to this Belmont report, which is very important for us, which came up after 1979, the three pillars, that is number one, respect for persons. That included the autonomy of individuals, and secondly, the special protection for those with diminished autonomy. We know why Belmont report came up, because of that Tuskegee syphilis study. So in the Tuskegee syphilis study, the Negro prisoners were taken. So they are the vulnerable people. So they require special protection because they have diminished autonomy. Same thing if you just think about that Willowbrook study. They took that mentally disabled persons, school students, who had already the diminished autonomy. So respect for persons means this requires number one, the autonomy of individuals, number two, the special protection for those with diminished autonomy. Number two, after respect for persons, it is important to check the beneficence. What is that? We need to maximize the possible benefits. And number two, we need to minimize the possible harm. Yes, in case of some phase 1 trial, we cannot provide benefits, but our objective should be minimizing the possible harm. And what is justice? Again, the subjects should be selected fairly to ensure that the benefits and burdens of medical research are evenly distributed. So we cannot do one study just to include some prisoners who are Negroes. So there should be a fair selection, and that is called as justice. So coming to that apology letter, which came long after 1997 by Bill Clinton, he had mentioned like this: what was done cannot be undone, but we can end the silence, we can stop turning our heads away, we can look at you in the eye and finally say, on behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry. So this statement was taken 1997. So almost 30 years after the Tuskegee study finished. So this is what we want to mention. Now coming to again those three cardinal principles. Number one, autonomy. Autonomy means that each person should be given the respect, time, and opportunity necessary to make his or her own decisions. Next cardinal principles is beneficence, that obligates the researcher to secure the well-being of all study participants. Now in Belmont report 1979, this line was mentioned, that is, maximize the possible benefits and minimize the possible harms. Third is the justice. It is a difficult and complex ethical issue, and attempt should be made to distribute the risk and benefits fairly and without bias. So who should bear the risk of a study and who should receive its benefits? Participants should not be selected due to class, socioeconomic status, or race unless justified by the study objectives. So this is a very important area. A few days back, one researcher came to me. He wanted to do one study on the pharmacogenomic effects of some anti-diabetic agents like sulfonylurea, and he told me he want to take Hindu, Brahmin, Bengali families. So I had asked why you are taking this. This is compromising the justice, the principles of justice. So now he was mentioning like that there were some studies, even he had done one study where he had found the specific gene what he is going to check, that is very much common in this subgroup of patients. So that is why he want to include those patients. So now if we justify this with science, then I think this type of the principles of justice is not ignored. So this is very important. Now coming to 1990s, which is also known as the decade of harmonizations, and the first international conference on harmonization of technical requirements for registration of pharmaceuticals for human use was conducted in the place of Tintin, that is in the Brussels, the city Brussels or in Belgium. So primary participants were USA, European Union, and Japan. There were some regulatory and industry representatives. The observers were Canada, Australia, and Nordic countries, and WHO acts as a facilitator. So now coming to the purpose of GCP, purpose of good clinical practice. So that should have a quality data plus ethics. So though this two is very important part of good clinical practice. So what is quality data? That is, data and reported results are credible and accurate. And what is ethics? Ethics means rights, integrity, and confidentiality of the trial subjects are protected. Another definition of ethics somewhere mentioned is like that. Ethics is just equal to multiplied product of 2M. 2M means I am not talking about M for money. I am talking about 2 M's, that is materialism multiplied by morality. So both morality and materialism is important, and they are multiplied product of these 2M. So if the materialism is 0, that means science behind the research is 0. It could be a highly moral research, but ultimately something multiplied by 0 is equal to 0. So ethics will be 0. Same thing happened. It could be a highly materialistic study. There is a high scientific reason for this particular study, but the morality is 0. So again, ethics will be 0. So this 2M is very important when we are talking about ethics. Now, if we just go by the ICH topics, there is 4 sub-chapter. One is regarding that quality, number 2 is safety, E for efficacy, and M for multidisciplinary. But in the GCP is present in the E6. So it is not in the safety sub-chapters. It is present in the efficacy sub-chapters. So there are different parts of E6 GCP. So starting from the glossary, principles, ethics committee, role of ethics committee, investigators, sponsors, protocol, finally the investigators brochure, and what are the different essential documents. So I request all of you to go by this ICE GCP chapters. Specifically, as we are all the parts of ethics committee, we need to know the ethics committee portion very well. Now coming to these 13 principles of GCP. These are very important. We need to understand. We need to know details of these principles. So they are ethical conduct. Number 2, the risk benefit assessment. Number 3, subjects over science and society. Number 4, adequacy of pre-existing information. Number 5, scientific validity. Number 6, independent review. Number 7, medically qualified care. Number 8, trained and experienced personnel. Number 9, informed consent. Number 10, efficiency of information handling. 11, confidentiality. 12, drug accountability. And number 13, quality through systems and procedures. So coming one by one, principle 1, that is ethical conduct. All the clinical trials, clinical researches should be conducted in accordance with the ethical principles. That what are the ethical principles? Already we had discussed: autonomy, justice, and beneficence, that have origin in the Declaration of Helsinki, and that should be consistent with GCP and applicable regulatory requirements. So next, risk benefit assessment, number 2 principles. So before initiating a trial, we should weigh the foreseeable risk and inconveniences against the anticipated benefit for the individual trial subject and society. And then we should initiate and continue if the anticipated benefits justify the risk. So in case of phase 1 clinical trial, what happened? There is no benefit. So we need to give more vigilant approach to ensure safety there. Number 3, the subject over science and society. So the rights, safety, and well-being of the trial subjects are the most important considerations, and that should prevail over interest of the science and society. It is not only the science and society that matters. It is most important part, most important is here the subject, the right of the subject. So this should be ensured. Adequacy of the pre-existing information, the available non-clinical and clinical information on an investigational product should be adequate to support the proposed clinical trial. So when we are doing one phase 3 clinical trial, we need to understand the phase 1, phase 2 clinical trial and the non-clinical trial data before initiating the phase 3 clinical trial. Similarly, when we are doing studies, we need to know about the adequate pre-existing information before giving permission to conduct those trial or study. Scientific validity, as already we had mentioned, the ethics does not mean only the morality. It is also the materialism. So we need to check whether the clinical trials, they are scientifically sound and they are described in a clear, detailed protocol. Independent review. A trial should be conducted in compliance with that protocol that has been received prior institutional review board or independent ethics committee for approval or favorable opinion. So that is why we are doing this type of GCP programs. That is why the ethics committee is there to check before giving permission to any study. Medically qualified care. So the medical care given to and medical decisions made on behalf of subject should always be the responsibility of a qualified physician or when appropriate of a qualified dentist. So if a patient is taken into a trial as a subject, the medical care should be provided adequately, and that is, there should be a qualified physician to do that. So there should not be any compromise in there. Then the trained and experienced personnel. So training is very important. So each individual involved in the conducting trial should be qualified by education, training, and experience to perform his or her respective task. And that is why one of these requirement, the GCP requirement, GCP certificate is required every year for ethics committee members or who are doing clinical research. So these certificates are very important, not only just for showcase, for this affirmation of that they are doing this type of education, continuous education or training regularly. And what is important, who is going to do which type of study, that is very important. So in a pediatric clinical trial, there should be a pediatrician who should act as a clinical, acts as an investigator. So this qualification is very much important and we need to ensure that. Next is the informed consent. Freely given informed consent that should be obtained from every subject prior to clinical trial participation. So informed consent is a separate chapter. It requires detailed understanding. We may have some discussions on this informed consent later. Now, the information handling efficiency. So again, this is very important because we had already mentioned the accurate data accuracy, data credibility is very critical. So for all clinical trial information, that should be recorded, handled, and stored in a way that allows its accurate reporting, interpretation, and verification. These principles apply to all records referenced in this guideline, irrespective of the type of media used. And confidentiality. So the confidentiality of records that could identify the subjects should be protected, respecting the privacy and confidentiality rules in accordance with the applicable regulatory requirements. Again, this need to be ensured. The drug accountability, the investigational products that should be manufactured, handled, and stored in accordance with applicable good manufacturing practice guideline. So just like GCP, there is another module that is GMP, good manufacturing practice. So we need to ensure the products we are using in the clinical trial, in the research, that is accordance with GMP. So they should be used in accordance with approved protocol. So the GCP principle 13 is quality through systems and procedures. So systems with procedures that assure the quality of every aspect of the trial that should be implemented, and aspects of the trial that are essential to ensure human subject protection and reliability of the trial results, that should be the focus of this type of systems. So quality assurance is very important. Now coming to one case, that is Mr. CG, who is a 58-year participant in an oncology trial, now recruited by treating oncologist. There is one traditional treatment present, and with that traditional treatment, it is like that traditional treatment is intermittently successful. Now this is a trial which is a randomized, single-blinded, placebo-controlled trial for 1 year. So what happened? After 6 months, he's not experiencing any signs of improvement, rather getting worse. So preliminary data suggesting there are evidences like that the drug is beneficial. That the drug which is going to be tested here in this RCT is actually beneficial. So how to deal in this case? If the during an examination time, Mr. CG, who is an cancer patient, asked doctor whether I am in the treatment arm or the placebo arm, and also he requested, as there is no improvement in 6 months, he thought that he could be in the placebo arm. So he asked, please switch me to the treatment arm. He wanted to receive the possible benefits of the new treatment. So how we should behave as a clinical researcher in this type of dilemma? So there is an inherent moral problem in the clinical research. So why we do clinical research? For generating useful knowledge about health and disease. Therefore, the benefit to research participants is not the primary purpose of the research, and this should be clearly mentioned in the informed consent. And research participants are the means to developing useful knowledge, and they are at the risk of exploitation, but we need to be very careful regarding the main purpose of the clinical research. And that is why, as a clinical researcher, we have a enrollment dilemma during that enrollment time. This is type of ethical dilemma which is defined as two-hat conflict. So what is that? The Hellman and Hellman in 1991 beautifully describe it, that consider first the initial formulation of a trial. A new agent that promises more effectiveness is the subject of the study. The control group must be given either an unsatisfactory treatment or a placebo. Even though the therapeutic value of the new agent is unproved, if physicians think it has promise, are they acting in the best interest of their patients in allowing them to be randomly assigned to the control group? So when I am there is two hat, means I am wearing the hat of a physician, treating physician, and also at the same time I am wearing the hat of a researcher. So there will be a conflict between these two hats. So we need to be very much clear about that uncertainty principles and clinical equipoise. What is that? Randomization is acceptable only when an individual doctor, as a treating physician as well as the investigator, is genuinely unsure that which treatment is better or best for a trial participant or patient. And this clinical equipoise refers to the collective professional uncertainty over the treatment and considered as the soundest ethical criteria. So this is not like just like statistical equipoise what we have used in different studies, but this is very important for our ethics related dilemmas, to dealing with ethics related dilemmas. This clinical equipoise is very important, and for that we should be very clear to overcome this therapeutic misconception. The James Lindemann Nelson has had defined it like this, that what goes awry is that the ill subject does not grasp that which she has volunteered for really is research. So it can be enormously hard to shake the erroneous belief that the intervention is designed to make the volunteer better rather than contribute to anything as faceless as the medical welfare of the future patients. So this therapeutic misconception should be clear, and this, in this case, we need to give emphasis on that two-hat conflict, clinical equipoise, and also to overcome the therapeutic misconception. We need to give more time. And now coming to the summary of GCP principles, there are some principles which ensures ethics. That means the ethical, how to conduct clinical trials ethically, the benefits of the trial justifying the risk, the right, safety, and well-being of the subjects should be prevailed. Next, there are few issues on protocols and science. There is a non-clinical and clinical information that support the trial, and the clinical trial should be scientifically sound with a detailed protocol. Next comes as some responsibilities, like there should be a IEC approval prior to the initiation of the study. So responsibility on behalf of ethics committee, the medical care related or medical decision making related responsibilities from the qualified physicians or dentists. Each individual involved in the trial, they should have adequate qualification to perform trial tasks. After responsibility, it is the informed consent, and informed consent should be obtained from every subject prior to this participation. Next part is the data quality and integrity. So accurate reporting, interpretation, and verification, protection of confidentiality of the records. Then the quality of the investigational product. So that should be manufactured, handled, and stored in accordance with GMP, that is good manufacturing practice. And finally, the quality control and quality assurance. So there should be systems in place to ensure the quality, every aspect of the trial. So this is a case you have noticed in your rural part of your state, that there seems to be an excessive amount of Crohn's disease among Adivashi farm workers. So you suspect that an exposure to some Mycobacterius aureus, which is found in the crops in your state, and that is responsible for, for this type of outbreak of Crohn's disease. So you develop an antibiotic regimen that is highly effective for this type of Mycobacterius aureus, and now you want to conduct a placebo controlled trial to treat these patients. So you develop an informed consent in local language that has been approved by ethics committee. You hire an interpreter also to help with the informed consent. The enrollment starts, and you are amazed that everyone asked to enroll is agreeable, and there is 100% enrollment. But there is an interim analysis done at 6 months into what happened. The trials in the interim analysis, it was found not expected. It was not effective. Now you thought you need to walk through the farm worker housing units. There you had noticed a box with 100 vials of your carefully leveled study medication, and none of the cells have been broken on the vials. So you find that the study subjects all signed onto that study, that informed consents, because they thought their job was in jeopardy if they did not participate. So there was some coercion. The interpreter did not explain what the trial was about, and to your dismay, the subjects did not read the informed consents due to that literacy issues. So these are very real life stories. What was good in this case in context with good clinical practice? Number one, there appeared to be sound scientific reasoning for this trial. The science is good. The protocol is well written. Number two, the IRB or ethics committee permission was obtained prior to initiation of the study. Number three, the informed consent was translated into the local language and there was an interpreter. But what went wrong there? How did this case deviate from JCP? Number one, the informed consent was prepared well, but it was not informed well. So informed consent should be informed well also. Otherwise, there is no good. They are vulnerable population, the workers. So they have a potential for coercion. We need to address this very critically. And this is also a responsibility of the ethics committee too, to ensure this. The translator not qualified to perform his or her task. So these are the problem. I'm not going details in the case 2. I think there is the time is already done. It is 6:50. So I will, if there is time, we can address it later. But what is very important? What is the summary for any checking any ethical issues related with clinical studies? This line: do unto others what you would like others to do unto you. So as a research participants, if I think myself, so when I am sitting in the chair of clinical researcher or trialist, the investigator, I need to put myself in the chair of the research participants, and then we need to check as a holistic approach the different parts of clinical study. And if I am convinced that yes, as the research participants too, I can accept this type of clinical research, then only we should go forward with ethical approval. And for that, very long before in Upanishad, the same ethos was mentioned, that is Atmana Pratikulani Pareshuna Samachare. So this is the main principles of ethics. If we follow this, no research will be unethical. So with that, I thank you all again. Once again, I thank Innovocare E-Academy today, and I will come back with my next presentations after Professor Tripathi sir's lecture. Thank you once again. Any question you can put in the chat box, we can address that in later. Thank you. Thank you. Now may I request Professor Santanu Kumar Tripathi sir to present the next topic, and that is very important for all of us. The topic is on ethics in clinical research. So sir, are you there? I think there is some, I need to, yeah. I think sir, you can, you become now co-host.
Hello?
Yes, sir. Now we can hear you, sir.
Okay. Okay. There was connectivity issue.
Yes, sir.
So you have to unshare your screen, I suppose.
I had unshared that, sir. You can
Okay.
share. No.
Okay. Is the screen visible?
Yes, sir. But you need to make it full screen, sir.
It's
So
not being full screen.
no, I think, sir, you need to unshare it now. Stop sharing now, and then you start. Yeah, you now again start share screen. Then you will find one option that is full screen option. So you have to click on that.
Is it all right?
Now it's all right,
Is it?
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So, well, we will be now discussing some issues related to ethics in clinical research. So, some of the principles Dr. Shambo has already covered, made things easy for me. So, Dr. Shambo has mentioned about the inherent moral problem in clinical research. We do clinical research in order to generate useful knowledge about health and disease. So Dr. Shambo has mentioned that the benefit to research participants is not the primary purpose of research, and so the research participants are rather the means to developing knowledge, and there is a possibility of exploitation, and hence the ethical requirements in clinical research aim to minimize that exploitation, minimize the possibility of exploitation, and it ensures that the rights and welfare of the participants are respected while they contribute to the generation of knowledge. That is the primary purpose. Avoiding exploitation in the participants, and their rights and welfare is to be protected. Fine. Dr. Shambo also mentioned about the two-hat conflict. This two-hat conflict does not only apply to the researcher who is incidentally a physician, okay, because it is only a physician who can conduct clinical trial. Again, these are the two terms, clinical research and clinical trial. While clinical research is a blanket term which not only covers clinical trials but other kinds of research, non-trial research also. As we know, clinical trial is an interventional kind of clinical research, and there are other kinds of non-interventional research like the observational research, surveys, etc. So a clinical trial can only be conducted by a doctor, by a medically qualified person. And a doctor is also responsible, he has his obligation, she has his obligation to the patients. Now, who are the participants in a clinical trial? It is the most of the time it is the patients. They, of course, there could be healthy volunteers who can participate in certain clinical trials. If you think of the phase 1 clinical trials, mostly it is by healthy volunteers. If you think of the vaccine trials, it is by the healthy volunteers, etc. Now, Dr. Shambo has clearly explained this two-hat conflict, that the researcher in a clinical trial, that is the trialist, okay, is, because he is a physician, he wears that hat of the physician as well as the hat of the researcher. Fine. And there is an apparent conflict when he is a researcher. Subconsciously, unknowingly, there might be a little more emphasis or a little more bias towards the role, his role as the researcher, keeping his role as the physician to the back seat. There is a possibility. So he has to therefore conduct very, very carefully and responsibly. On the other hand, if you think of a patient is not just a patient here in clinical trial. Patient is actually participating in clinical trial or clinical research. So there also, this person who is volunteering, the volunteer also has two roles. One, his role as a patient. On the other hand, so long it is a patient research. On the other hand, his role as a volunteer. Of course, when the healthy volunteers are participating, they are not patients, so they do not have two roles to play. So this is to be properly balanced, and this kind of dilemma are otherwise properly balanced and handled by the ethics committee. This, to a certain extent, these two had conflict, and also that uncertainty principle and clinical equipoise Dr. Shambo has discussed. I am not going into that detail. It is tempting to also mention, when you talk of clinical equipoise, that is at the start of a clinical trial, the physician should be really unsure, truly unsure about the worth of the test drug vis-a-vis the comparator drug. The comparator drug could be a placebo, it could be a existing standard treatment or whatever. So long the investigator is unsure about their status, their worthiness, then only he is actually ethical. Otherwise, what will happen? If he believes that this one is better than the other, he should use the better one for his patient. So that is actually the requirement, that equipoise, that whether they are on the same board, the two treatments. Okay, and to ensure this, the strategy that is the randomization. It is the randomization which is an acceptable strategy, whereby the possibility of using his judgment as a physician, knowing that this could be superior to the other, that is otherwise prevented. Okay, avoided. Now I find there is a question in the chat box. Okay, there is a question there where it asks that when the physician who is the researcher, he comes to know that the test drug is superior, okay, it is producing benefit. So should he not stop it, or should he not change the design and use the test drug to the other people also, to the people who are getting the control, maybe which is placebo, or maybe which is standard drug which is inferior by now? The answer is no. The answer is no, in the sense that, and that is the reason why we say a good clinical trial is one that is randomized and that is blinded. Okay, and particularly so long it is double blinded, it is still better. And secondly, if you think of a new drug, for a new drug, when you are conducting a phase 3 trial or a phase 2 trial, you are only given permission to conduct the trial. The investigational product is not supposed to be used for any other person than the trial purpose. Okay, so you cannot use, just by giving some preliminary indication that the test drug might be superior, it is showing better efficacy or better effectiveness. That doesn't mean you will jump into it and you will start using that for treating your patients. That's not allowed. That even by law it is not permitted. Okay, and even if you go by science, that just by your own observation in a couple of patients, in a few patients, you may not be actually concluding it right. When you think of all the patients all over the different centers in a multi-center trial, when you collate them, then you will find that ultimately it is not really as bright as it was imagined by looking at it in a given, in your own center, in a few patients. So the answer to the question that has been posed in the chat box, the answer is no, you should not try to do that. Okay, you should wait until the final analysis of the results they come up, and you know about, and when it is licensed. Now if you are, instead of a regulatory trial, if you are doing some academic trial with the already licensed product, there also, in the interest of your research design, okay, both ethical and the scientific design, you should not do that. If you really feel that if I do not do this, it is going to harm the participant, then take that participant out of your trial and treat them with the other options available outside the ambit of the trial design. Okay, you should be fair to your patient also, or the volunteer also. There is definite indication for that. But so long the patient is within the trial, you should follow the protocol. You should not do, you should not violate the protocol until the point the protocol compliance is going to otherwise cause injury to a trial participant. That's it. Let's move on. This is a concept what is called therapeutic misconception. This relates to the patients actually. When the patients are asked by his physician to take part in a trial, the patient actually wrongly believes that if my doctor is asking to participate in a trial, this new drug, this test drug must be a better treatment. So why not participate in this trial? So misconceiving experimental medicine as a better therapy, that is therapeutic misconception. So this is also quite common among patients who participate in clinical trials. Now, how to avoid this? How to minimize this? To prevent therapeutic misconception, certain strategies have been put forward. One is dissociating and distinguishing between patient care facility and the research facility, even within the same institute. So when the patients are coming to your hospital, they are coming to seeking care. They are coming for relief to their problems. They are not coming really to take part in the research. It is just by coincidence that they are made to participate in research. But then, instead of considering your patients from your clinic, OPD or in IPD, okay, consider them whether they would be suitable for taking part, and then telling them that why don't you take part. So there you cannot avoid the therapeutic misconception. Instead, if you feel that this patient might be a potential participant or an eligible participant, ask the patient to really go to another facility, neighboring facility, which is a research facility or research wing or research division, and there the patient knows that they are entering into a research department or a research division. And then in your informed consent document also, you have to be extremely transparent and tell them in clear terms that they are actually going to take part in a research project, and this is the purpose of this research. Okay, but at the same time, you have the obligation to provide the person the treatment or care, but then the patient should be knowing that they are taking part in research. Now I'll be discussing the 4 cardinal ethics principles, and these are, autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. Autonomy is every individual should be given the respect, time, and opportunity necessary to make his or her own decisions. That whether or not to take part in a trial, the decision is to be made by the person himself, and we should not in any way influence his decision. Okay, we should respect his own decision making. We should respect his time, opportunity. So that is what is autonomy. We need to respect it. Next is beneficence. That obligates researchers to secure the well-being of the study participant. That the study participant actually, as we have discussed, that the primary purpose of research is not to provide benefit to the participant. This is true, but at the same time, we need to ensure to the extent possible that if at all, so long it is possible, we should also be aware and conscious that we must provide some kind of benefit to the participants. Okay, so it is the historic Belmont report, 1979 Belmont report, which actually propounded this principle of maximizing benefits and minimizing possible harms. Okay, so that is about beneficence. I think the non-maleficence is not there in this slide, but what does it mean? Non-maleficence is do no harm, that there is no way you can afford to do any kind of harm, inflict any kind of injury to your participants. And you, as investigator, as the ethics committee, you should ensure that there is no harm or minimizing harm, avoiding harm to the extent possible. and if any harm occurs, immediately to respond to it and provide the management. So that is the non-maleficence. And the fourth is the justice. Justice is distributing the risks and benefits fairly and without bias. Who should bear the risk of a study and who should receive its benefits? If you think of a clinical trial, new drug clinical trial, it is the risks are mostly being shared and shouldered by the research participants, and major part of the benefit is actually going to be uh, enjoyed by future patients, not the participant really. So a participant should not be selected due to class, socioeconomic status, race, or unless justified by the study survey. This is the principle of justice. I think this is also these principles also Dr. Shambo mentioned in his presentation, but it is important to repeat them also. Now, application of ethical principles in conduct of clinical trial is extremely relevant. The purpose is to protect the study participants' well-being, rights, and confidentiality, to offer an independent and the most proximate buffer mechanism against any potential or actual exploitation to study participants. So it has to be independent, means free from all biases, and the most proximate, near to the patient, on the site, available on the site. So who is going to offer this? The local ethics committee, institutional ethics committee. They are closed. Why it is important to have institutional ethics committee, local ethics committee? There could have been a central national ethics committee. Okay, there is truly one in ICMR, but that may not be enough because they will not be able to oversee what's happening to the study participants at the site. And secondly, India is a very vast country, so even the local culture and custom varies from one part of the country to the other. So there is a case for local ethics committee or institution ethics committee to be in place. And all our institutions who are interested to conduct clinical research, they have their own ethics committee, and it is not just enough to have it. You have to also follow certain minimum standards, and it is the registration process by Government of India with Government of India that actually ensures that we follow or we are otherwise adhering to the minimum standard requirements. Okay, and we know there are two registration processes, one by the CDSCO, which looks after the ethics review of the regulatory studies. On the other hand, there are non-regulatory academic studies. For that, the ethics committee is to be registered with the Department of Health Research, Government of India. We know these two registration processes. And if an ethics committee tries to review projects, both the industry sponsored regulatory trials as well as academic research, so then in this ethics committee should be registered with both these two registration bodies, that is CDSCO, Central Drug Standard Control Organization, headed by the Drugs Controller General of India, which is the drug regulatory authority in India, and on the other hand, the Department of Health Research, Government of India. The third bullet is to make clinical research conform to the regulatory mandates. So all the different regulations that are there, okay, apart from the new drugs, there are also regulations, or you can say guidelines, okay, ICMR guidelines. They actually govern the quality of clinical research in the country, both the academic and the regulatory, but particularly for the academic, because the regulations, CDSCO or the new drug clinical trial rules, truly speaking, are not very precisely applicable in case of academic clinical trials or academic research, although there has been clear mention about how the academic research will be conducted. That is also mentioned in the rule book, that is the New Drugs and Clinical Trial Rules 2019. But it is the ICMR guidelines of 2017, Biomedical Research Ethics, that should be our main reference document for conduct of academic research. Fine. So let's proceed further. An independent body, that the bullet number 2, middle bullet, the independent body is the IEC, okay, the Institutional Ethics Committee, needed to oversee clinical trials conduct and ensure ethics compliance. Now, coming to the definition of ethics committee, it is an independent board or committee constituted and formally designated by an institution. So it is constituted by the institution and formally designated. What is the purpose? Purpose is to review, approve the initiation, and conduct periodic review of biomedical research involving humans. Why they should do that? In order to safeguard the rights, dignity, integrity, and well-being of the study participants. Okay, so that's the job of the ethics committee. In the definition of good clinical practice that was discussed by Dr. Shambo, you have noted that there are two purposes. The standards, GCP is a standard, but finally in the last part of the definition you have seen that the scientific as well as ethical aspects are to be. So scientific aspect is data credibility. What data we are generating, they are reliable, they are credible. And on the other hand, while doing so, while engaging into science, we should not forget about the participants, the volunteers, because they are human beings. So we should be otherwise sensitive to their rights, their welfare, their well-being, and we should be properly ensuring that they are not harmed, their rights are not violated, etc. So that is the ethics part. The science and ethics together, that makes the prescription of the good clinical practice. Now, how the ethics committee is composed? So minimum of 7 members, maximum of 15 members, their composition. It should be oriented to the cause of ethics. The committee must be oriented to the cause of ethics. In order to be oriented, we need to have exposure, need to have sufficient study of this the discipline, okay, discipline of ethics. And that's the reason possibly many of us are attending this program today, to get oriented to the cause of ethics. We need to be proficient as members of the ethics committee. Each member should be proficient to review and evaluate a project, research project. We must be qualified by training. By this training, we mean actually GCP training. And the composition is the chairperson of the committee must be outside the institution, external member. The member secretary is internal, and at least one member each from the basic medical science, from clinics, legal expert, layperson from the community, social scientist. These are the key members of the ethics committee. So one clinician, one basic medical scientist, one legal expert, one layperson from the community. Why layperson from the community? Layperson from the institution. In the institution also there are many laypersons, but they were not acceptable. So layperson is an external member, extra institutional member. And the social scientist, like or NGO representative or theologist or religious leader or ethicist, etc., any one of them. So altogether, these are the 7 members: chairperson, member secretary, and these 5 categories. And these are the 7 members who actually form the quorum. The quorum is to be formed by these 5 kinds of members, in fact. And of course, the chairperson must be there. Now, chairperson could be any of these 5, including these 5 also. One of the 5 persons may be the chairperson, but because chairperson otherwise do not withhold his decision unless there is a tie, so that's why many believe that chairperson should not be counted in this minimum 5 categories of membership in the quorum. Okay, so that is the situation. The external scientific experts should also be there, because there might be some project. Even the medical members, like basic medical scientist or clinician, they might not be the expert in that particular therapeutic area. So there might be a need for inviting some external expert in order to understand the nitty-gritty of a particular research project, which might require the subject expert to opine. But then the subject expert cannot really give any vote in an ethics committee. He is not really a part of the ethics committee, but he will give his opinion and leave the meeting. The decision will be taken by the ethics committee. Then adequate representation of age and gender should be respected, should be there. It should not be all males. So there should be also gender representation. And community and special patient group representation is also welcome, particularly in institutions where they are looking after particular therapeutic area. So the patient representative, whether it is cancer, whether it is HIV/AIDS, so the patient group representation is also encouraged. When protocols involving pediatric population are reviewed, there should be EC member or expert consulted by the ethics committee who are knowledgeable in pediatric ethical, clinical, psychosocial issues. So this is also in ICH E11 clause. So profile of all members should be available at the site. Ideally, every member should have a file, and that has to be maintained by the member secretary. And in that file, individual member file, all the documents of that, including the CV of the member, the training certificates. So all these GCP training certificates, the ethics committee SOP training certificates, all these must be there in his own file, which may be also inspected by the regulatory inspection or even by the inspector from the sponsor or auditor. So the appointing authority of the ethics committee is the institution or the institution head. The appointment has to be formal in writing. The tenure must be mentioned in the appointment letter. The terms of reference must be very clear in the appointment letter itself. So under what conditions the membership can be terminated, that should be clearly written. And all the members must be properly trained, and training facility or opportunities must be provided by the institution concerned. The conflict of interest issues are to be properly handled. Okay, so at the time of appointment itself, the members are to the new members, they have to also declare their conflicts of interest. Okay, and based on that, you will decide whether he should be kept as a member or not. But over and above that, during each meeting for each project also, they have to give their conflict of interest to be declared. And the ethics committee SOPs must be developed a priori, and all the committee members are to be trained by the trained with the ethics committee SOPs. How the ethics committee should function, it should be pre-conceived and laid down, okay, in black and white. So the conflict of interest issues, the ethics committee perspectives are there. We can discuss a little. They can be broadly considered in two ways: consideration of conflict of interest of the AC members, ethics committee members, and handling or managing conflict of interest of other stakeholders, the investigators, institutions, etc. Now let us share some experiences. Say for instance, in your ethics committee, there is a legal expert member. It has to be. Now that legal expert member is a practicing lawyer. Now this legal expert member was privately engaged by the principal investigator, okay, of a project to negotiate with the sponsor of that project regarding the resolution of a matter of indemnification vis-a-vis payment of compensation for an injury. Further inquiry revealed that the same lawyer was also appointed by the same doctor, same investigator, as his legal consultant to look after his professional practice issues. What do you think? That whether the legal expert of that ethics committee can be unbiased in reviewing the project proposal submitted by the same PI. So there is a clear conflict of interest, and it is expected that the legal expert will mention all these in the conflict of interest declaration, and then he can actually debar himself from reviewing this particular project by this PI. Okay. Another situation where in one ethics committee in a private hospital, besides the external legal expert member, there is an external legal expert. Legal expert is to be external, we have said. But besides that, there is a senior official from the hospital who is a lawyer by training and who is appointed as an additional legal expert member in the same committee, whose main job is to see how the institute would benefit and to ensure that institute does not face any trouble, any kind of legal trouble. Now, what do you think? Whether there is conflict of interest involved? Okay, so all the members are to be independent otherwise, because this is an independent ethics committee. But here there is a clear kind of bias, and this member, this legal expert, who is actually a part and parcel of the hospital, ideally the legal expert should be external member, but in this case, in this committee, there is an external legal expert. Additionally, there is another legal expert, okay, who is a legal expert by training and who is actually employed by that hospital. He is also a member of the same ethics committee, and the job he does in sitting in that ethics committee meeting, that how the hospital is going to benefit out of it, okay, to look into that. Third experience, in one EC meeting, the layperson member, on meeting a senior cardiologist who had submitted a research proposal, a hypertension trial, and is waiting to make his presentation. Just before his presentation, the lay person, actually who is a lady, discussed her health problem with the cardiologist and sought for an early appointment. The cardiologist is a top-notch practitioner in the city, and getting an appointment is not very easy. But now this layperson, member of the ethics committee, sought an early appointment in the private clinic of the cardiologist. The cardiologist obliged immediately and called his secretary and asked him to accommodate the lady the very next day. He also instructed to make the visit complimentary, that is non-paying. Now, what do you expect after this? When the cardiologist will be making his proposal, the hypertension project proposal, so this layperson member, will she be very neutral and otherwise while reviewing the proposal? So there is a clear conflict of interest. And these things are otherwise very commonly, they do happen, but when these things happen, we are not actually doing justice to our position in the ethics committee. We should try to avoid them very consciously. So another experience in one ethics committee, a clinician member, a very senior professor is a chronic absentee, hardly ever attends the meeting, yet manages to retain his membership for years after years. And only thing that every time he is shown as present in the meeting, although he is absent, but in the minutes book, his signature is obtained by the member secretary. So he physically never is present in the meeting. But because he is a big personality in the hospital, okay, so nobody dares to challenge him. Okay, so that also happens quite commonly in our perspective, in our setting. So we need to avoid these things. Now, addressing the conflict of interest of ethics committee members, the purpose is to uphold ethical standards, acting with honesty in public interest and for public good, consciously avoiding possible mix-up of private interests. That is what is conflict of interest. Mix-up of private interest and professional goals with the ethics committee duties, responsibilities, and obligations. Promptly disclosing any real or potential competing interest that may conflict with the primary interest of safeguarding the rights and well-being of research participants and the broader societal goal. So this is what is the issue of conflict of interest we should remember. Now, the ethics committee roles and responsibilities, broadly you can think of before the study begins, while the study continues, and after the study has ended. Before the study begins, there is a responsibility of the ethics committee to get itself registered, to have the ethics committee SOPs, standard operating procedures in place, to check the investigator eligibility, site feasibility, and the conflict of interest of the members of investigator, all stakeholders, trial registration, whether it is done with the CTRI in India, and the regulatory approval has been obtained in case of a new drug, review of research proposals with reasonable time, decision making in formal meetings, and proper documentation, issuing an approval in appropriate format, and record keeping, writing the meeting agenda in real time, meeting minutes, decisions communicated to the investigator, annual and final study reports. So this is before the study begins. And during the study, review of all, so the job of the ethics committee doesn't end with giving approval or rejection. So the job of the ethics committee continues even when the study is being conducted. Review all ethics committee notifications, amendments, protocol and informed consent documents, protocol deviations, reviewing serious adverse event reporting, analysis, relatedness assessment, deciding compensation. So this is a big area again. So time may not permit to discuss in detail about this essay reporting, analysis, relatedness assessment, deciding compensation. This is particularly relevant in case of the new drugs about which there is a lot of uncertainty about their risk. But it is also important in case of academic clinical trials because of the current situation of payment of compensation issue, which is not very clear who is going to make payment in academic trials. So, but then in regulatory clinical trials, it is very well defined, and there are very clear roles in terms of reporting, the timeline for reporting, the analysis, relatedness assessment, etc. And as ethics committee members, we should be thorough in these activities. Assessment of the serious adverse event reports, which is submitted by the investigator, and then give our report to the regulatory authority, who will then, particularly in case of death SAE, serious adverse event deaths. So the decision of relatedness assessment, final decision is done by the expert committee at CDSCO level. So this is a very important responsibility of the ethics committee. Next is about monitoring informed consent process. So informed consent process, the plan for the informed consent process has been submitted during the review, and based on that, that has been reviewed, and once satisfied, that is approved. But then whether the informed consent process is happening, okay, as per the plan that was submitted during the review process, so that is also to be looked into by the oversight of the ethics committee. So that is what is called continuing review by the ethics committee. So that is again extremely challenging. So we are not yet very comfortable with continuing review. What we do is, prior to the research begins, we look at the protocol and the other documents and say that yes, it can go ahead, or no, these are the issues you need to amend, and then we can consider whether for giving approval, like that. But equally important is continuing review by the ethics committee. So I think it is time that we should also give more attention to the continuing review part also. Monitoring the study progress and periodic review of the study conduct. Here also it is mentioning periodic review, and communicating with the investigator, the regulatory authority, and the subject as needed. That communication is also a very great responsibility of the ethics committee. Allowing regulatory inspection when the regulator sends their representative to inspect the site, and the ethics committee, that should be allowed by the ethics committee. Record keeping, that is meeting agenda, meeting minutes, and the decisions communicated, etc. All the records should be available, and whenever the inspector will ask for, they should try to provide it. Coming to the responsibility after the study ends: review of all essay reporting, analysis, relatedness assessment, deciding compensation, communicating. So all these continue even after the study is over, and receiving the reviewing the study report, post trial management. All these are to be looked into. Trial is over, but then there are many responsibilities that also remains towards the end of the trial, after the trial has been over. In fact, there is a big responsibility that formally, in case of a regulatory clinical trial, industry sponsored, the trial site is to be otherwise formally closed. That is called closeout visit. So there also the that has also to be communicated to the ethics committee. So while this is done, all the commitments and obligations to all research participants must have been completed. That's what the ethics committee will try to look into. So before the closeout is taking place, okay. So, and then publication is also an issue that ethics committee should look into. Publication out of the study. Record keeping, archival is also ethics committee is responsible, whether there has been enough arrangement and properly the archival is being done. And allowing regulatory inspection is the last thing that has been mentioned. So the ethics committee should function in accordance with the written standard operating procedures for each and every activity of the ethics committee. There are separate standard operating procedures, and all the people will be adhering to the standard operating procedures. And these standard operating procedures, they provide detailed guidelines about the ethics committee procedures. Okay. The PI and not the sponsor communicates and deals with the ethics committee. The elements of review, what do we actually review in the ethics committee? First is suitability of the investigator, where you have to look into the qualifications, the biodata of the investigator, whether he is suitable to undertake the study, doing justice to the volunteers. Okay. The experience of the investigator, that otherwise commensurate with the type of the study. The support staff, they have adequately, the team has adequate support staff. Okay, because it's not one person's job, only the PI cannot do things, principal investigator. Available facilities are there or not, and emergency services, if required, whether they could be arranged. So all these are to be ensured by the investigator. Okay, so that actually will decide about suitability of the investigator. Then suitability of the protocol, whether the protocol is complete, properly written. So the protocol is actually the main document which is reviewed by the ethics committee. It has to be read properly. the protocol, at least the protocol synopsis, if not the full protocol, a 200-page or 400-page protocol, but the bare minimum is reading the protocol synopsis, and then in the main document some of the sensitive sections or chapters, okay, like the SAE management, like the insurance part, okay, so they are to be properly, very thoroughly read. Okay, the informed consent part, so they are to be thoroughly read and understood, and then only we will be giving the considering providing approval. So in the protocol, it has been stated here that background and justification of the study, objective of the study, study design and methodology, these sections we all must understand. And most of these we will find, if we very attentively try to read the protocol synopsis, most of these will be covered. But there are certain issues like this confidentiality of subject and data, the risk and benefit of trial subjects. For that we need to go to the master document, okay, to the main document. We can refer to, try to understand that much better. The informed consent document is one. Okay, informed consent documents are of two types. One is subject information sheet, the other is informed consent form. So that has to be read thoroughly, and we, as an ethics committee member, we have to ensure that the translated version, whether in vernacular translations, they are also properly translated. Okay, so that the translation sometimes becomes less understandable than the original English version. So it should be properly translated. It is actually meant for the volunteer to understand that. Without understanding, they cannot give consent. So that should be looked at. This is also a very neglected area. And then out of the different members, we know that there is 5 different categories, and then the chairperson and the member secretary. So who does what? What is expected from the legal expert? What is expected from the lay person? That also we need to consider. And whether there is a consensus or voting for coming to a decision, that should be mentioned in your SOP. When you talk of the ethics review, these are the things that the ethics committee should look into while reviewing the project proposal. First of all, whether there is at all any need for this research. What is the level of need? Whether it is a real unmet need. What are the objectives of the study? Are they very specific, measurable, smart objectives? What is the design of the study? Whether the design is good enough to realize the objective stated. What about the risk benefit analysis? What are the conflict of interest issues? Whether that has been properly articulated. And then the informed consent issue and the subjects, trial subjects. So these are the areas. How do you select the subjects? What are the inclusion exclusion criteria? Where from you are getting the subjects? How do you reach out to the subjects? Okay, whether the when selecting the subjects, whether the ethics principle of justice is properly kept in mind, that the distribution of the benefits and burdens are equally distributed. So whether that is done, or whosoever are close to you, your own patients, or you can easily have access, you are getting them to take part in the trial, that should not be done. Okay, so these are, we have said this nod, RBA, CI, ICS. Nod, N for need, O for objective, D for design. Then risk benefit analysis is RBA. Then conflict of interest is CI. Then IC is informed consent and subjects. So these are the things. If you try to remember this, nod, RBA, CI, ICS, then probably most of the key elements in ethics review issue that will be touched upon. So need is for essentiality of the study. Is the study rational? Study rational, clearly stated. Objectives, are they clearly stated? Design, are the study methods and design appropriate? Then about the risk benefit analysis, conflict of interest, investigator payment, institutional benefits, the clinical trial agreement and the financial agreement, look into it. And many of these agreements are to be actually the right person to look into them are the legal expert. The subject source, vulnerability of the subjects, okay, inclusion exclusion criteria, particularly you have to look into the privacy confidentiality issues. All these are to be looked into. Risk benefit analysis, when you talk of, you have to do a risk assessment, minimal risk or more than minimal risk. Now in reference to that, I request you to go to the ICMR document, ICMR 2017 guideline, and there you will find there is a very good representation of this risk matrix, they call it. Okay, whether it is minimal risk or less than minimal risk, not more than minimal risk, and more than minimal risk. And more than minimal risk, again, two subgroups have been divided: high risk and not so high risk. So all these more than minimal risk, they are to be, you have to conduct full board review. If it is not more than minimal risk, you can think of doing an expedited review without a full board meeting. So usually the expedited review, the ethics committee should have a small subcommittee where at least two members, one medical and non-medical member, they can represent their minimum number should be two. There could be more than that, and they will be doing the review without the full board or full meeting, formal meeting. And then if they feel that yes, this can be approved, so they will give the approval. They will pass on their comments to the member secretary. Then the member secretary and chairperson will issue the approval letter. Okay, but then the final approval, this approval has to be endorsed in the next physical meeting. Okay, and it has to be minuted also. So that's the expedited review. An expedited review or full board review is decided with the application of this risk matrix, whether the risk is not more than minimal risk. Now the question is, what is the concept of minimal risk? When do you call this is minimal risk? Minimal risk is a concept where in usual day-to-day healthcare, the kind of risk that we accept as patients in order to actually expect for a greater benefit. Like, so when you say, when you are giving me an intravenous injection or you are drawing some blood sample from my vein, there is a risk there. One is, of course, the pain that is inflicted. Apart from that, if there is, the asepsis is not properly maintained, the area could be also infected, there could be an abscess, etc. But then this is considered to be not more than minimal risk. So it is not more than what is otherwise expected in routine care delivery. Okay, so even during research, when you do these kind of interventions or these kind of procedures, so they may be considered as not more than minimal risk. And these kind of proposals, you can think of reviewing them even outside a full board physical meeting, and it can be done with an expedited review meeting. And besides that, all the observational studies, okay, they are accepting for the privacy confidentiality issue, because there is no research intervention, there is no question of any kind of harm or risk, apart from, of course, the privacy confidentiality issue and the personal information disclosure, etc. Okay, so there is also, in most of the time, we consider it as not more than minimal risk, and expedited review is possible. So if you go by this, then major burden on the ethics committee in the full board meeting will be lessened, and then we can actually give more time, quality time, in reviewing the clinical trial project proposals. Okay, risk management strategy is also to be clearly understood. It has to be clearly spelled out, and it has to be acceptable. And if necessary, in certain projects, there should be also provision for a DSMB. DSMB is nothing but Data and Safety Monitoring Board, and usually the DSMB is appointed by the sponsor. So it is at the level of the sponsor. But then DSMB actually helps the sponsor to take a decision, early decision, based on interim analysis of a study, whether the study should continue further or you have to prematurely stop the study. So that is actually guided by DSMB decisions. But apart from that, DSMB decisions can also, DSMB findings or DSMB observations or DSMB review can also help in safeguarding the interest of the trial participants. Because if the DSMB actually looks into the data from all the centers, multicentric study, so they get a holistic view about the safety of an investigational product as compared to a local ethics committee. So if they feel that the test product which is being experimented, that is otherwise too harmful, they may consider stoppage of this thing, and this DSMB observation should also be forwarded to the local ethics committees. So that's about the DSMB concept. Benefit assessment is to be also looked into, that whether there is any possibility of direct benefit to the trial participants or there are indirect benefits. Now this is an ethics review elements checklist that I had prepared, where we have mentioned all these NOD, RBA, and that the informed consent and ACE subjects. Apart from that, the conflict of interest issues, they have also been discussed. And if you look at the number 8 mandatory clause, 8 clauses in the informed consent document, when we are checking the informed consent document or reviewing the subject information sheet, we must see all these elements have been mentioned there. Okay, that first thing is you have to mention that this is a research. We are inviting you to take part in a research study. Okay, and then you have to mention in clear terms, in understandable terms, what are the risks involved in participation and what are the potential benefit that he can expect or the society can expect. What are the alternative treatment options? If the volunteer doesn't want to take part, then what are the other options he has in reference to his treatment, whether he retains his right to get the treatment. He should not be threatened overtly or covertly that either you participate in the trial or else I am not going to treat you. It should not be like that. To mention also that it is a voluntary participation and he has the fullest right to withdraw from the study at any point of time and to say no at the very beginning itself. Voluntary participation, that is, this particular statement actually respects the principle of autonomy. Then the question of confidentiality, there should be one paragraph which should highlight the confidentiality of issue, how that will be protected. The research related injury, if there is any, then how that is going to be managed, and whether the volunteer will have access to free treatment and to compensation for the injury if it is a serious adverse event, and whom to contact in case of an emergency. So these are the clauses or these are the paragraphs that must be there in the informed consent document or the subject information sheet. And finally, the ethics committee also has to look into the miscellaneous issues like regulatory approval has been obtained or not in case of a regulatory trial, permission for exporting material to other countries, the CTRI registration has been done or not. CTRI is Clinical Trial Registry of India. So whether that is done or not, etc. And then what are the global comments of the ethics review process that has to be written. So from tomorrow, you can think of using this ethics review elements checklist, okay, during your ethics committee meetings, okay, and then for each project you can write these down, and this is the checklist, and not just saying that yes, when you say essentiality of the study is the study rational clearly stated, it is not enough to say yes. You have to also say in which page, what is the page number where this has been mentioned. If you have to mention the page number, I mean each member should do that. If you have to mention the page number, you have to study the whole protocol. Okay, that is the purpose of developing this review checklist, which I believe that would help much to the members. And in fact, we have used this and we have validated this checklist in our own institution and in our own setting. Coming to the informed consent, the second part of my talk is the informed consent, the process by which a subject voluntarily decides and confirms his or her willingness to participate in a particular trial after having been informed and duly understood all relevant aspects of the trial. So that is the definition of informed consent. So basically, informed consent is a process. Informed consent is not a piece of paper. It is a process by which the subject is voluntarily deciding and confirming his willingness to participate in a particular trial after having been informed and duly understood. Only information is not enough. Information is just unilateral. But whether the subject has understood, you have to also ensure that. And then only he can give his consent. Okay. The consent is documented. Consent needs to be also documented by means of written, signed, and dated informed consent form. So as I stated, informed consent document has two parts: one, subject information sheet, and the other, the informed consent form. So both these are important, and the form is to be utilized for the purpose of signing and date with date. And it has to be a written form. Okay, so that's about the process. And the informed consent elements are, the threshold elements are competence and voluntariness, whether the person is competent to give consent. Okay, if he has his sound mental faculty, then only he is competent. If he is a very young child, he cannot give consent. He doesn't understand. If he doesn't understand, how can he give consent? But then if his age is say 7 years and above, then possibly to a certain extent he will understand, and we should also ask him what is his take in participating in this, and you have to tell him in a language that he understands. Okay, not necessarily you have to make him understand the whole protocol, but what it is broadly, what it is all about, and what he is expected to do. Even in a 7-year-old, 8-year-old child, you have to tell them, and that process is called assent process. ASSENT, assent. So the assent from a competent child, okay, competence comes from 6 years and more. Below 6 years, it is non-competent. So there is no point in trying to expect any kind of nod from a very young child. So 6 and above children, they will give assent, and then the parents will give consent. Now, if the parents have given consent, but the child has not given assent, you cannot proceed. The reverse: the child has given assent, the parents has not given consent, then again you cannot proceed. So you need to get both assent and consent in case of a pediatric trial. So that is about competence. Okay, if you are competent, like if somebody is not mentally sound, he is not competent. Okay, in that case you have to think of somebody who is his caregiver and his custodian. So you have to possibly consider him or her for the consent. Voluntariness again is very, very important. Okay, next is about the I think one thing is also missing about vulnerability in threshold element. So there are sometimes, say for instance, the prisoners, they are considered to be vulnerable because they possibly cannot say no with the fear that their stay in the prison may be prolonged if they say no. So vulnerability is also another important issue, and that makes the whole issue complex, and you have to also consider vulnerability. Accordingly, it has to be addressed properly. Then the second is informational element, that is disclosure of the information, proper adequate disclosure, appropriate disclosure of the information. Then recommendation about that why he should or he may consider participation, and then it has to be understood by the participant, comprehend the things, and then she can think of deciding or authorizing. Okay, this is the consent element. Okay, so threshold elements, information elements, and consent elements. So informed consent in research means sharing relevant information with the potential participants, delivering the information in a manner that the same can be understood by them, giving them sufficient time and opportunity to reflect, and if needed to consult others around, allowing them to take participation decision freely without any coercion, without any influence, and documenting the consent in writing. So IC or informed consent is rather a process, not just a document. So I have mentioned that these two documents, the subject information sheet and the informed consent form. The subject information sheet must include all the basic elements of informed consent that we have discussed already. And I think somebody has some question. I think at the end we'll take the question. Dr. Dev Shankar Das has raised hand. So we'll take your question at the end. We'll come back. Now the IC process, as we say, when you talk of informed consent process, there are 3 words. When you talk of informed, then you have to consider what information, what is the quality of the information you are providing, how the information is being transmitted, how it has been translated. If it is in English, what is the quality of translation, and is it understandable? All this is about that informed part. Then consent. The consent has to be in writing, and you have to also consider voluntariness. Okay. And then the process. The process involves who is administering this. Okay, the informed consent process, who is administering and how it is being administered. And the informed consent subject information sheet, it must contain these 8 elements plus the 1 element, that is AV recording, particularly in case of vulnerable population. Okay, audio video recording of the consent process. Okay, and the 8 mandatory clauses are research, risk, research, then risk benefit, then alternative treatment options, then voluntary participation, then about confidentiality, then about research related injury and access to free treatment or to compensation, and then whom to contact in case of an emergency. These are the 8 elements that must be there in the subject information sheet. Besides that, if there is a question of vulnerability, then the AV recording, audio video recording is also to be done. That should be also mentioned there. Okay. In fact, for audio video recording, there should be a separate informed consent for the audio video recording itself. Okay, because the video recording can also be misused or wrongly, inappropriately used at a later point of time. That should be avoided, and that should be ensured, clearly mentioned there. So I'm not going into details any further here. In case of the document is to be, informed consent form is to be signed and dated by the subject or the legal authorized representative in case the subject is a minor or somebody who is not competent. And then the role of a witness is also there. If the person is illiterate, then the role of witness is there, and the person is illiterate and is otherwise putting his thumb impression, not signing, etc. And the role of the signature of the investigator must be also there. The person obtaining the consent, if not the investigator, his signature will also be there. So there are some contentious issues in informed consent: who to give consent, who to take consent, whether it is written or oral consent, documentation of consent process. Should non-consent be documented? If somebody says that no, I'm not interested, I will not participate, that is what is called dissent. Whether we should dissent document also, document the dissent also, that so many people I approached and so many people didn't agree to take part. So whether that is to be also documented. What if the participant is illiterate? So we just discussed, if the person is illiterate, there are also provision that how you should document it. Some other contentious issues like risk and versus benefits. The benefits, minimal risk concept we have discussed. What is assent we have discussed. Waiver of consent. Waiver of consent, particularly when, say for instance, there is no scope for any patient interface. Okay, you are actually working on hospital records or the archive tissue samples. Then there is this waiver of consent will apply. There is no need for going for consent, neither it is possible to go for consent, in fact, because there is no patient around. Feedback to the participants is also another important issue, that particularly in case of a multi-center trial, if you keep on accumulating serious adverse event reporting from different centers, whether there is the risk benefit ratio also changes then, as it was in case of when you actually administered the informed consent to a given participant. So whether there is a need to come back to that participant and say that the risk benefit ratio has changed and now this is like this, and whether based on that you want to reconsider your decision to continue in this trial, or you need to withdraw the consent. So that is also important, feedback to participant. And then in case of academic research, what's happening and what should happen. When is the IC process finished? We should remember that it's not a one-off phenomenon. It may be continued throughout the trial. Okay, there might be many reasons why you need to repeat the consent process. At each interaction, the investigator must reassure voluntary participation continues and new information is given to the subject. The special attention of the principal investigator or ethics committee is solicited in case of these issues to ensure that the participants' experience in clinical trial are positive. No pediatric trial without a skilled and experienced pediatrician in study team. Study site ambience is very important. The physical setting with furniture, with play equipment, particularly in case of pediatric trial. The food appropriate for age. The study conduct in familiar and friendly environment, preferably in hospital or clinic where participants normally receive their care. Post-trial access is another big concept, that after the trial is over, what is our obligation to the trial participant, their well-being, etc. The approaches to minimize discomfort or procedures such as topical anesthesia in place of IV, to place IV catheters, indwelling IV catheters rather than repeated punctures for sampling, collection of some protocol specified blood samples when routine clinical samples are obtained. So all these are important. The 7 principles in ethical frameworks are like this. The scientific question must be valuable. It should add value. There must be a valid scientific methodology. Sometimes it is argued that why should ethics committee raise a scientific design issue? Simply because that any unscientific study is overtly unethical. So scientific evaluation is also a responsibility of the ethics committee, and that's the reason the two medical scientists or the two medical professionals, one clinician and one basic medical scientist, are there in the committee. So fair selection of participants, that is justice, favoring risk-benefit, favorable risk-benefit ratio, that is non-maleficence and beneficence, independent review, that is public accountability, only when it is independent. So we are actually accountable to the public, to the general public, that it has to be independent, it cannot be biased, and that's why the independent ethics committee is appointed. Informed consent, we have to consider about the disclosure issue, understanding by the participants, the competence of the participant to give consent, and voluntariness in giving consent. These are the key issues in informed consent. And the respect for enrolled participants, that is again the principle of autonomy is considered here. The right to withdraw is respected. Any point of time, the volunteer can withdraw without having any reasons to give why he is withdrawing. Privacy issue, protection of the study subjects, the ensuring their well-being, sharing subject data and information is another big issue. So all these are covered into this ethical framework, the 7 principles of ethical framework. Okay. And I think that is the last slide. To end with a quote like this: ethics is not definable, is not implementable, because it is not conscious. It involves not only our thinking but also our feeling. So with this, there is another set, that is compensation. I think for the time being I'll pause here, and these issues may be discussed during the question answer session. And this is the ICMR guidelines 2017. All of us who are serious in the business of clinical research, we must read this document. ICMR guidelines. There are 2 documents, 2 such guidelines, one for general adult research, the other for pediatric research. Both these documents came one after another within a month gap, and both these 2 documents are to be thoroughly read by all serious researchers and the members of the ethics committee. This is the subtle difference between regulatory and academic clinical trials, and this definition has been given in the 2019 the New Drugs and Clinical Trial Rules of India. That is also an extremely important document for all of us who are members of the ethics committee and who are there to review the project, the regulatory research proposals like phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. Okay. Academic clinical trials, where they are exempted from the getting permission from the regulatory authority, that has been exempted, and we can do without that. The local ethics committee is the last authority to govern conduct of academic clinical trials ethically. I'm not going into further details. Serious adverse events and their management, compensation in regulatory clinical trials particularly, and this has been very thoroughly and very nicely addressed in the New Drugs and Clinical Trial Rules. All of us must go through those clauses, and as necessary we can have separate sessions on that. Compensations in regulatory trials, this is the rule 41 in the New Drugs and Clinical Trial Rules, and rule 42 for procedures for compensation in case of injury or death or permanent disability during clinical trial, or a bioavailability bioequivalent of a generic product. These are the rules. Rule 43 is medical management and compensation for injury or death relating to biomedical and health research, and research related to injury in case of clinical trials. So this is again a gray area. It's not very properly being implemented properly, or particularly regarding the management of the research related injury and the reporting and the compensation, etc. So of course the ICMR has given very clear guidelines, but implementation of that guidelines is not really happening in most of the institutes. Now, I think there is a separate, separate session on stakeholders in clinical research. I say that if you put like this, I praise is the stakeholders, but more detailed, I think Dr. Shambo would be discussing separately in a separate session about stakeholders in clinical research. But just to end here, these are the key stakeholders: investigator, the participants, of course, but in some cases it is the tissues and the stored data, okay, personal data, uh, clinical data. Regulator in case of regulatory trial, ethics committee, of course, local ethics committee, and site administration has a great role, hospital administration, okay, and then the sponsor, who is sponsoring the study. So all these role of each of them would be discussed in greater detail by Dr. Shambo, I think, in the next presentation. Thank you very much. So let me see if there are any questions in the chat box. Am I right in assuming that two main types of clinical trial from initiation perspective, one new drug clinical trial by industry and two academic trial of already approved drugs? Absolutely, you are absolutely right. These are the two broad types of clinical trials. Yes, new drug clinical trials and the academic clinical trials. New drug clinical trials, mostly it is sponsored by the industry, and of course our recent experiences like the COVID vaccine trials, to a great extent it was ICMR that was also involved in co-sponsoring them. Okay, although they were also new drug clinical trial, but that can be considered as an exception because of the pandemic situation, and the government cannot leave it totally in the hands of the industry. So government came up and joined hands with the concerned industry to have these trials being conducted, and ICMR was a co-sponsor in all these vaccine trials. And the academic trials are otherwise, which is non-regulatory in nature. So there again there are different varied kind of sponsor. It could be by Department of Health Research, by ICMR, by World Health Organization, they can sponsor, or even it could be self-sponsored. The investigator himself is the sponsor. So there we call it sponsor investigator. Okay, so you are absolutely right that yes, there are these two types of research. Then how are conflicts of interest handled by ethics committee members was another question. I think we have uh, discussed something, but then if you ask how it is handled, then ethics committee members are supposed to submit their, declare and disclose their conflict of interest when they are being inducted as a member, number one, and each time when they are participating in a meeting, ethics committee meeting, and every project is being discussed. So there might be one member who might be purchasing shares of a company, and that company project proposal is being discussed. So he might have some kind of interest there, bias there. So he has to disclose. And then other issues I have discussed already, that some members might have some conflict of interest with the investigator. Okay, because of which the decision taken by that member or the member's perspective may be biased. So he should be or she should be extremely transparent in that and disclose that. Okay, I'm a patient of this doctor. Okay, how can I be neutral? Okay, so that this is what is conflict of interest declaration. And every meeting they have to disclose, they have to sign this or disclose their conflict of interest, and that has also to be documented properly. So I hope I have been able to answer your question. And next was what to do if over a time of period it is found that the drug may be beneficial and control arm subjects are deprived. How do we know that who is control and who is drug? Because most of the time it is double blind and randomized. But in case it is an open trial, and we know, even then we should not do that so long it is in the, and if you feel that yes, we will not be doing justice, okay, we are depriving the control arm subjects, then take them out of the trial and treat them whatever best treatment you have available. That's the only solution. Should we change the mode of the trial? No. Answer is no. You cannot do it in the trial mode. You have to take them out and treat them with the best possible options that are available at your hand. So that's about it. I think there are no further questions. Okay. So somebody raised hand. If you can write in your, because I don't think whether you will be able to voice your question, but then you can write your question in the chat box. then we can try to answer that. Or else, I think I can stop here. I hand over to Dr. Shambo to take it further. Over.
Okay, thank you, sir. So we are moving to our next topic. And sir, you need to stop your screen sharing. Yeah. So thank you, sir. So now we are moving to our next presentation, that is on regulations and guidelines in India, specifically focusing on different stakeholders that we are going to discuss, the roles and responsibilities of key stakeholders in respect to clinical trials. So first of all, yes, we all know there is some difference between regulations and guidelines. What is regulation? Regulation means something which we must follow. If we are not following, then we are going to face some punishment. So in case of, the traffic laws, there are some laws and regulations. If we break that traffic regulations, then we need to give fines. But what is guideline? Guideline is something which is help us, which is going to help us to deliver a optimum level of care. But guidelines are not always guidelines. If we break guidelines, if we not follow guidelines, it is not like that. We are going to be punished each time, every time. So yes, guidelines are something which give us a very helpful platform. If we follow that gives an optimum result. And for talking about clinical trials or clinical research, there is two important regulations that we must know. Two important regulations and guidelines, that is, one is New Drug Clinical Trial Rule, that is 2019. That is the regulations we must know. And number two, one guideline given by ICMR, how to conduct clinical research, that we also need to follow. So here I am just mentioning you can see here the picture of CDSCO, the regulators, the Central Drug Standard Control Organization. They are the drug regulators in our country. They have certain rules that we need to follow. And ICMR is the apex society which facilitates research, facilitates clinical research. So again, they are not the regulators, but they are the facilitator, we may say. So if we just check the historical evolution of different documents in India for clinical research, then first of all, there is one regulations or rules, that is Drugs and Cosmetic Act and Drugs and Cosmetic Rules in 1940s and 1945. We can see it took almost more than 60 years to have that amendment, and we have that Schedule Y amendment in 2005. But there are some guidelines. First time in India, we had good clinical practice guideline at around 2001. That was by CDSCO. Then we also get the ICMR guidelines on ethics, how to conduct clinical research in 2000s, and which was revised in 2006. And which is very important, as the stem cell research is evolving in our country, the guidelines was developed for stem cell research and therapy by ICMR, and with help of Department of Biotechnology, first time in 2007. Then it was revised in 2013, and the current version is National Guidelines on Stem Cell Research, which was developed in 2017. This is the book we all should read to understand the guidelines on clinical research. And this is the latest version, 2017, which give emphasis on few areas like public health research, social and behavioral sciences research for health. Apart from that, they had also given emphasized on research during humanitarian emergencies and disasters, how to react. So I think they, in this COVID-19 pandemic, we had understand the importance of research in during this type of disasters. So ICMR already, they had a very beautiful document or guideline to facilitate research during this type of emergencies. Otherwise, there are some specialized areas like informed consent process, biological materials, preservations and facilitation of research on that issue, biobanking, data sets, and vulnerability, which is we are discussing a lot of time. They are expanded in separate sections. And during this COVID time also, for ethical committee, there was a special edition of this ethical guideline, and it was done, we can see, in April 2020, just after or maybe 15 or 20 days of COVID-19 pandemic announcement in India, the ICMR came up with this guideline. They were so fast, they had an intention to prevent suffering of research by COVIDization. So I just want to mention here one case, that is a study of drug A versus drug B in mild COVID-19 patient. They want to do this study in the telemedicine platform. So what are the options? Before this COVID-19 pandemic, in the ICMR, there was no concept called as electronic consent. So this is the first time when 2020 guideline came up, they had mentioned, they had even emphasized on electronic consent. And they had online, they had facilitated the online ethics committee meetings, how online ethics committee meetings can be conducted. That was also discussed in this particular guideline. So another important aspect, that is another case I just want to share, the trial of vaccine X, where the study excluded the COVID-19 RT-PCR positive cases. Now, some volunteer came, the research, he want to be a research participant. So at screening found to be COVID-19 positive. So informed consent was not done, as it was positive, as it was screen failure. Now just a referral to COVID-19 hospital was written and he was referred back. What happened? After 1 month of this incident, someone, Miss A.S., who is a daughter of this Mr. S.S., sent a letter to the director of the hospital, accused hospital for death of her father and mother. You may astonished why she is accusing. Now, the director also asked to ethics committee member secretary to react to this letter. We need to go in details of this complaint. Now, what happened there? So Mr. SS, who found to be positive, COVID-19 positive, and just a referral to COVID-19 hospital was done from the research team. Mr. SS, we all know in the beginning how much stigma was there with COVID-19. So he went back to the home. He confined him inside the home, and according he was also transmitting his virus to his family members, his wife and his daughter. Now both the husband and wife died due to COVID-19. There was no care. So Mr. SS, though from the research team, paper wise, they had done a good job. They had seen it was COVID-19 positive, so referred to COVID-19 hospital. But whether we should act more holistically in this type of situation, that is the issue, because ethics is something which is beyond, which is documented only, which is actually stimulate our consciousness and our morality. So in this case, if it is like that, there should be a proactive approach from the research team, as there was a COVID-19 positivity, whether a telephonic call to the family members or Mr. SS to ensure whether he is taking therapy or not is important, whether the education regarding that COVID-19 related management should be promoted from the researcher's side. That was the question, and actually EC member secretary had raised this issue towards the research team. So this is very important aspect. Now coming to the new drug clinical trial rules 2019, which is a regulations, and these rules we all, as a clinical researcher, as a clinical trialist, as an ethics committee member who are going to give permission to the clinical trials or monitor clinical trials, we all should know this document. Now, if we just check the clinical trials in India last 10 years, if we just check the global data, in 2011, in India has accounted for only 5.5% share of global clinical trials activity, which we can see along with the time after this 2016, 2017 is going up. In 2019, after this new drug clinical trial rule, it was quite high. You can see 11%. Though due to this COVID-19 pandemic, maybe that is a cause, there is a dip in the percentage. It is now 8.3%, but it is over than the last 10-year average. So this is a very promising trend that is found in India. It is not only the industry sponsored trial. We can see here a good percentage of non-industry sponsored clinical trial is going here. So we need to know about the different parts of clinical trials nowadays, because we all either directly or indirectly is going to be participated in clinical trials. So the disease wise, again, there is a steady increase in the rate of infectious disease clinical trial. We all know why this is happening in 2020 due to the maximum number of COVID-19 clinical trials that are undergoing here. So, but what is important, we can see a good percentage of other therapeutics related clinical trials are also ongoing here. I think when we are talking about clinical research, this algorithm is very important for all, for investigators, for ethics committee members to understand what type of research we are going to see. So first of all, to understand the type of clinical research, we need to ask this question. That is, did investigator assign exposures? So as an investigator, if I am assigning which group is going to take medicine A and which group is going to take medicine B, then I am dealing with a experimental study. So if the did investigator assign exposures this question, the answer is yes, then we are dealing with experimental study. Then we need to ask whether it is the allocation is randomized or not. If it is yes, then it is randomized control trial. If it is no, then that is the non-randomized control trial. But when investigator is not assigning exposures, so as an investigator, I am not deciding on which group will take A and which group will take B drug. I am just observing, then it is an observational study. So if the did investigator assign exposures, this answer is no, then I am going to deal with the observational study. If it is a comparison is there, then that is a analytical study. It could be cohort study, case control study, or cross-sectional study. I'm not going in details of that, but why it is important if the comparison group is not there, so that is a descriptive study. So why we need to understand which is observational study and which is experimental study, that I am going to discuss, because for all practical purpose, if we are dealing with some observational study, we have this guideline, ICMR guideline is there, which is generally for facilitating observational study, the ethics related with observational studies, and we must comply with this guideline. And for experimental study, the clinical trial, the new drug clinical trial rule 2019 is extremely crucial. We need to understand that and we need to follow that. So this is why this algorithm will help us to find the document that we should read. So this is a picture taken, the same thing, the picture taken when my guide Prof and my mentor Professor Santanu Tripathi sir was taking a class in our STM School of Tropical Medicine's lecture theater. So this was drawn by him. I think this is a very important flowchart or algorithm we all should know. So coming to clinical trial, if we go by the definition given by New Drug Clinical Trial Rule 2019, so clinical trial is any systematic study of a new drug or an investigational new drug in humans to generate data for discovering or verifying its clinical, pharmacological, that includes both pharmacodynamic and pharmacokinetic properties or adverse effects, with objective of determining its safety, efficacy, or tolerability. So this is the definition given by the New Drug Clinical Trial Rule. Now coming to the responsibilities of key stakeholders in clinical trial. So this line, again, this is a quote from Professor Santanu Tripathi sir, that is, we do research for the pupil and that should be with the pupil, not on the pupil. So the first statement should be like that: pupil or participants, they are also a very important part of clinical trial. They are not any subordinate thing. They are equivalent to us, rather than they are the most important stakeholders of clinical trial, and we all should remember that. So coming to this diagram, where we can see the different stakeholders. So when there is a clinical trials, specifically the regulatory clinical trials, so there is the sponsor who is going to discuss with the regulatory authority. Before that, they should have a site management organization and investigator team. Then they will communicate with the regulatory authority, that is the CDSCO. When they got the permission from the regulatory authority, they will contact with the SMO or investigator to submit their proposal to that specific institutional ethics committee. There is the role of investigator to talk with the site administrator, to communicate with the site administrator. There should be a tripartite agreement between site, investigator, and sponsors. Then the investigator will recruit the subjects. The subject is very important part, as we had already mentioned, and anything that could, any adverse outcome that may happen to the subjects, or subject may require some clarification, they can contact with institutional ethics committee at any point of time. And regarding that compensation issues, regarding that serious adverse effect issues, the IRB or IEC can directly contact with the regulatory authority, and their communication should be there. The two-way communication should be there. Also, in case as the research is ongoing in the premises of some specific hospital, so site administrator, they should have again a two-way communication between IRB or institutional ethics committee and themselves, and also with the investigator. So there are some other parts, other organizations like contact research organization, site management organization. So they have some specific roles we will going to discuss a few moments after. So first of all, one of the important stakeholder is sponsor. So sponsor includes a person, a company, or an institution or an organization that is responsible for initiation and management of clinical trial. So who is going to initiate or manage a clinical trial? They are the sponsor. So what are the responsibilities of sponsor? Number one, protocol development and other related document development, including the informed consent document, facility selection, staff and infrastructures, particularly in reference to specificities of this protocol, engagement of the CRO if required, selecting, appointing, and training the investigators, informing about the rules in general and also the protocol, regulatory submission, that means the investigational new drug application to the CDSCO, or in case of America it is US FDA, coordinating with the IEC submission and notification. Then site initiation, the investigational product management, that is a very critical issue, that is a very important responsibility of sponsors, how to develop the formulation, manufacturing issues, dispatch to site, accountability, the GMP, the disposal policy, protocol amendments, then the QA/QC, how to do the monitoring, inspections, handling breaches of GCP or protocol. Everything is the sponsor's responsibilities. Finally, the risk management in terms of subject selection, study design, engaging the data safety monitoring board, compensation, indemnity, insurance, this all comes under sponsor's responsibility, and drafting and signing of the clinical trial agreement. So we can see as we had mentioned about an independent data monitoring committee, they are for to assess the progress of the study, the safety data, the critical efficacy endpoints. Apart from that, the sponsor will arrange for monitor. Who is monitor? They are the communication link between sponsor and the investigator. They are generally medical experts hired by different sponsors to oversee the study progress, GCP compliance, and data handling. Apart from that, arrangement of audit, compensation, and premature termination of clinical trial, that should be informed to the investigator, ethics committee, and regulator too, in case of regulatory clinical trial. So these are the different aspects of sponsors' responsibility. So sponsors' responsibility for monitoring audit. The purpose of the sponsor's audit is to evaluate the trial conduct, to see the compliance with the protocols, SOPs, GCP, and regulatory requirements. There is certain difference between monitoring versus auditing. Auditing means they are independent, third party driven, whereas monitoring is a part of the study conduct. They oversee and ensure compliance, but audit verify compliance. So monitoring is an ongoing process during the study, but auditing means it is a snapshot, like one-time point checking. The study team is the responsible for monitoring, whereas for auditing, the main purpose, main responsibility to assure the quality. So monitoring means just filling a checklist, but auditing means verifying the checklist was filled or not. So why this QA/QC is important? The purpose of the quality assurance is not to ensure that the data are 100% error-free. Its purpose is to ensure that the clinical trial results are reliable. That means observed treatment effects are real, their estimated magnitude is unbiased. So quality control and quality assurance. Quality control helps to identify the abnormalities or inconsistencies, verify the process. It is the responsibility of a researcher or scientist, and they will not perform the quality assurance activity. But quality assurance means they help to prevent the abnormalities and inconsistencies. This is a preventive process like thing. It is a responsibility of the management, and they will also perform the quality control. So it is also denoted like that, to validate the system, quality assurance over quality control. Now coming to the Data Safety Monitoring Board's responsibility. As Dr. Arnav Bhattacharya had asked, that if one drug, after a few days, if some drug is going to show benefit and another drug is not going to show benefit, it is very difficult if we are doing something which is blinded trial or randomized controlled trials. But sometimes there is a predefined policies of interim analysis. And if there is a predefined policies of interim analysis, then with the help of this Data Safety Monitoring Board, we can early terminate clinical trials if we are seeing the benefit is much bigger than the in one group compared to another group, or risk is much bigger. That means some predefined statistical cutoff. So safety is seriously compromised, then we can prematurely terminate the clinical trial. And there is a role of Data Safety Monitoring Boards. So having a Data Safety Monitoring Boards in specific clinical trials like phase 1 studies, as already we had mentioned, in phase 1 studies, there is no scope of getting benefit. There is no scope of beneficience. So having Data Safety Monitoring Board is sometimes a regulatory mandate. Retaining the independence and autonomy of the board, although this is engaged by the sponsor, but Data Safety Monitoring Board can only recommend to sponsor. and inviting domain expert in the meeting if needed. That can be that can come under provision. Critically evaluating the rationale of the first dose and the design proposed for dosing. That is a responsibility of this DSMD. Holding frequent or periodic meetings to assess the rationale for continuing or stopping a study, as we had mentioned, interim analysis. So these all are the Data Safety Monitoring Board's responsibility. Now, as an investigator, what are my responsibility? To lead the investigating team at the study site, insight in or compliance with regulators and good clinical practice, must be thorough with the protocol and the molecule, that is with the investigational brochure. So in particular, its safety profile, we should be very much thorough. It is our responsibility as an investigator to submit in the ethics committee and further communications. Investigator is responsible for ensuring safety and well-being of research participants, like essay reporting, management, ensuring that the facility is appropriately equipped, including the management and resuscitation, ensuring that all members in the study team possess the necessary insights and skills, understanding study rationale, the design, controlling access to and use of the investigational product, that is also known as investigational product accountability, documentation, record keeping, archiving, ensuring access of regulatory and IEC personnel to the facility and to the data. Now coming to one part, that is sponsor investigator. Can a same person can become a sponsor investigator? So people who serve in a sponsor investigator role must fulfill the obligations of both sponsor and investigators. So individuals who both initiate and conduct investigations, and the person under whose immediate direction an investigational drug or intervention is administered, dispensed, or overseen, they are sponsor investigator. So sponsor investigator can be an individual. So in case of academic clinical trial, ideally the investigator is a sponsor investigator. They can take some fund from some funding bodies, but the pharma company or any other industry, device industry, they cannot be act as a sponsor investigator. So few questions. If you have answers in the mind, may I request you to write in the chat box. Person or organization, they are hired by sponsor to perform some of the sponsor's trial related duties. So what is your answer? Please type in the chat box. So persons or organization hired by a sponsor to perform some of the sponsor's trial related duties. Yeah, Dr. Harlalka tell it is CRO. Any other answers? So who is the person or who is the organization hired by a sponsor to perform some of the sponsor's trial related duties? Okay, so we are moving to the answers. So yes, Dr. Harlalka had rightly mentioned, the answer is contract research organization. So thank you. The next question, the medical experts hired by sponsors to oversee study progress, GCP compliance, data handling. The answer is, anyone please volunteer? Write in the chat box. Who is the medical expert that is hired by sponsors to oversee the study progress, GCP compliance, and data handling. Any answer? Okay. So any more other answers? So hired by sponsors to oversee the study progress, GCP compliance, and data handling. Okay. So let's see the answer. Yes, it is medical monitors. So monitors are the medical experts that is hired by the sponsors to oversee the study progress, GCP compliance, and data handling. Now, the third question. That is, who must provide insurance or legal coverage for investigator malpractice or negligence, whether it is the investigator or the sponsors. So investigator malpractice or negligence, who should cover? Sponsor. This is actually a little bit debatable, but for insurance or legal coverage for investigators' practice, it is actually the duty of investigator to provide the insurance for himself. Okay, so coming to one case study, a gastroenterologist had been asked to participate in a trial of a new monoclonal antibody treatment for ulcerative colitis. One of the endpoints of this trial is mucosal healing. A sigmoidoscopy is performed at screening, and then after 12 weeks of study medication, if there is improvement, the patient continues in the trial. The patient has returned for the 12-week sigmoidoscopy, but what happened? The recording equipment fails. So gastro did the sigmoidoscopy and things were better. And now the patient was begging to stay in the trial. So gastroenterologist scored the endoscopic findings of being slightly better so that the patient had a chance to stay in the trial and took some pictures. Due to technology failure, gastroenterologist did not have video documentation for the sigmoidoscopy, but he had pictures. Now the question is, should the patient remain in the trial? What are your responsibilities to GCP in this trial? What is the sponsor's responsibility? And what is the responsibility of CRO? So first of all, as we are talking about data quality and integrity, in this case, the failure of the equipment is leading to problems with reporting, interpretation, and verification of the results. So you want there to be an improvement so the patient can remain in the trial. So that actually places the bias into the decision making if you make that decision. The question of bias came here. Now coming to another part, that is quality control and quality assurance. Critical technology should have consistent quality. The quality check should be consistent to prevent failures. And there must be a systems in place to deal with technology failure. And this is the responsibility of sponsor and CRO. Now coming to another important stakeholders, that is regulator. Prompt expert review of IND application along with all relevant submissions advanced regulatory inspections of the facility, checking eligibility, competence of the investigators and team, site SOPs, holding dialogues or meetings with the sponsor in order to optimize the protocol, and ensuring the subject safety, how the serious adverse event management done, payment of compensation for in case of injury or death, and also, which is very important, the early communication, early decision making. Now coming to the institutional ethics committee's responsibility, but it has been covered in great details by Professor Santanu Tripathi sir. So they should have a special insight and skill of the members of the committee in reviewing such study, understand the regulatory mandates. That is why it is important to understand, to know the new drug clinical trial rule and ICMR guidelines, the ethical obligations specific to given phase of clinical trials, specifically in case of phase 1 clinical trial, which is a healthy volunteer study. We need to be very much critical, inviting a domain expert in the meeting in some cases, critically evaluating the rationale and the design proposed for the study, continuous ethical oversight and monitoring. It is not only just to give a permission and stop, close your eyes. It is very important to have a continuous monitoring of particular study. Communicating with the investigator, data safety monitoring board, and sometimes regulators when required. Appreciating vulnerability of the subjects and high degree of uncertainty and safety concerns, where we need to have some audiovisual recording of the informed consent process. Now coming to this, may I request all the delegates to have a snapshot of this slide, and may I request all of you to answer by yourself and send it to Rohan, maybe Mr. Rohan Tripathi, and also Mr. Rohan Tripathi is going to give you the right answer of this slide so that you can check how much understanding you have regarding this role of key stakeholders. So the number 1 question, in conduct of a pre-marketing trials, so that means a regulatory clinical trial, who is responsible for, number 1, deciding entitlement for compensation for trial related injury or death? Who is going to decide that about that compensation in case of regulatory clinical trial? Number 2 question is access controlled record keeping of documents at site during the trial. Who should have the access control record keeping? Who should take the informed consent process? Who should participate in this informed consent process among these options? Investigator, sponsor, IC, regulators, or site administration. Regarding that data management, who is responsible? Who is responsible for registering the study with clinical trial registry? Planning and implementing quality control or quality assurance, including audit. Who is responsible? Constitution of the ethics committee. Who is going to appoint its members? Whose responsibility? Next is, who is responsible for investigational product, storage, administration, and accountability? Who is responsible for obtaining regulatory permission for the conduct of a trial? And who is responsible to record all pertinent data in the CRF? So I think you take the snapshot, you already taken the snapshot of this slide, and you try to answer these questions. Now, this is the last slide. But what I want to make here, yes, in DNA also, they look little simple, this diagram, but we can understand how much complexity present in this DNA too. So there is, as a whole, clinical trial, conduct of clinical trial may be shown as a very simple thing. But if we go in details, there are lots of complex issues we have. But if we follow the rhythm of ethics that already we had discussed, the morality and materialism, if we can control that, then I think the clinical research, clinical trial conduct will be very smooth and easy. With that, I again once again thank you all. Now may I request Professor Tripathi sir, Santanu Kumar Tripathi sir, to have the final lecture of today's. Over to Professor Santanu Kumar Tripathi sir.
Thank you, Dr. Shambo. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Audible, sir.
So we have not much time left, but then maybe I can spend some 10-12 minutes. If there are questions, although initially we planned that we'll be discussing the experiences and particularly in terms of what happens at the site. Okay, let me very briefly, quickly tell you that how to handle a regulatory clinical trial and what's happening in the site in terms of the conduct of a regulatory clinical trial. That means if it is a phase 2 or phase 3 clinical trial for that matter. Now, usually it starts with the potential investigator receiving a call from somebody from the sponsor or from the CRO on behalf of the sponsor. The doctor, would you be interested in some study in this particular therapeutic area? So if you say I may be, then the first thing that will happen is they will ask you to submit or to sign a kind of confidentiality agreement. Okay, they will share with you a confidentiality agreement that whatever they are going to disclose with you in terms of a protocol synopsis, telling you about what the study is all about. So these are all proprietary information. So you have to sign the confidentiality that even if you finally decide not to be a part of the study, you cannot disclose this to anybody else. So that's how it goes. So you sign the confidential agreement, then the sponsor or on behalf of the sponsor appointed CRO, that is contract research organization, will share with you the protocol synopsis. Okay, to have just a overall understanding about what the protocol is about, what the study is all about, whether it will be feasible for you to conduct the study at your site, at your hospital. So after having a look at the protocol synopsis rather, which is a summary rather, 2-3 page or 4-page document, then if you still have your interest and you say that yes, I would be interested, then the next step would be the sponsor will ask you about certain site related issues and also about yourself. Okay, so that is what is called site feasibility. So usually they will share with you a site feasibility questionnaire, whether it is feasible to conduct the site at your hospital, conduct the study at your site. And for that, they will also try to look into whether your site has an ethics committee which is registered duly with the CDSCO, because it's a regulatory clinical trial, whether you would be eligible as an investigator. For that, he will ask for your medical registration certificate, will ask for your degree certificates, will ask for your biodata, brief biodata, your experience, your GCP training certificates. So then they decide, yes, you are, otherwise would be eligible, your past experience of handling regulatory clinical trials. then they feel yes, you may be eligible. But then whether your site would be eligible, or whether it is feasible to conduct the study at your site, they will not try to know about your site, your ethics committee, your site, what are the facilities available at your site, given in the given therapeutic area, what are the patient flow, how many patients do you deal or your hospital deals, okay, and keeping in view the inclusion exclusion criteria, what would be the kind of uh, possibility of getting enough number of patients at your site, whether you have a team, who are the other people in your team, whether you have a study coordinator or site coordinator, whether you have some equipments or instruments, logistics that are otherwise required, whether, say for instance, the study requires a minus 80-degree refrigerator, whether that is available there, whether if it is a vaccine trial, whether there is a vaccine storage facility there, okay. So whether you have, depending on the nature of the study, the different kind of instrument equipments that would be required, whether it is available there. So there might be a detailed kind of site feasibility form that you have to fill in, which will try to capture all sorts of information regarding yourself, regarding your study team, regarding your patient pool, regarding your hospital, regarding your ethics committee, regarding the style of your ethics committee functioning. So every details. And after receiving that from you, okay, if they feel that yes, the study can be conducted at your site, then they will be considering you to be a potential investigator, and your site being as a potential site. Then from their end, they will try to get the approval from the regulator, and they then would be sharing with you the protocol, okay, the draft protocol or this version of the protocol, and they may think of holding a investigator meeting where the protocols will be discussed in detail. So there you need to critically look into all the aspects of the protocol and then give your comments, and based on your feedback there might be a necessity for amending the protocol, certain clauses, etc., that the sponsor will be doing at their end. In parallel, they will also make regulatory submission, because the regulatory submission, after the regulatory submission only, there will be some regulators will also take some time to review and then possibly approve the protocol and the other documents, and along with the centers, because your center along with you as the investigator will also be submitted with the regulator CDSCO. And at your end, the sponsor would be expecting you also submit the protocol and other documents with your ethics committee. And for that, the sponsor would be sharing with you all the documents, the ethics submission documents ready for submission. And you have to write a forwarding letter along with all these documents to your ethics committee, requesting for an early review of the protocol and documents. Assuming that ethics committee approves it, then side by side the sponsor will also be working for the other kind of agreements. One of the important agreement is the tripartite agreement, okay, between the institution, the investigator, and the sponsor. But there could be additional parties also involved in it. Say, for instance, if there is a co-sponsor. So in our previous session, I was discussing that in certain cases there could be co-sponsors also, like in vaccine trials, COVID vaccine trials, ICMR was the co-sponsor in almost all the trials. So that becomes the fourth party. There might be CRO involved, not only the sponsor, so that can be the fifth party. So like that, there could be a dedicated laboratory also involved who will take responsibility. Okay, so there could be this party also. So like that. But broadly speaking, the major three parties, they must be there, and that is the investigator, the hospital administration, that is site administrator, chief of the hospital, and the and the sponsor. This is the tripartite agreement. And when you are asked to go ahead with the signatures in the tripartite agreement yourself, and also it is your responsibility to get this approved or get this signed, concurred by the hospital administration. So for that, you have to explain that to the hospital administration, how the hospital is going to benefit, or hospital is otherwise put into some kind of challenge, that you have to explain to the hospital authority. And in case there are some issues, then this has to be again brought to the notice of the sponsor when the necessary amendment in certain clauses are to be made. And following that, the final version of the clinical trial agreement is to be signed by these three parties, and all the parties will be keeping one copy with them until the study is completed, etc. So once these formalities are completed, the ethics committee having approved, the regulatory authority having approved CDSCO, then you are ready for the to go further. And this is the point of time when you would be expecting the other supplies, clinical trial supplies from the sponsor. So there also you have to receive them, you have to store them, you have to properly preserve them. So the different clinical trial supplies, one of the important supply would be the investigational drug or investigational product, that is IP. We need to remember, when you talk of IP as per the GCP, it is not just the test product, but even the comparator product. Even if the comparator product is a standard licensed, already licensed product, even then for the purpose of this trial, that becomes investigational product. Now all these, always remember that never ever allow the sponsor to supply the investigational product until and unless the regulatory authority has approved it. Because until the regulatory authority approves, okay, the investigational product supply and receiving that and keeping it your premises will be illegal, because this product doesn't have any approval yet. The regulator has not approved the trial yet, so the product becomes illegal. Product is unlicensed product then. So neither it is licensed for trial nor it is licensed for use, public use. So don't allow that. Usually that hardly happens, but then it may so, because the sponsor always try to hasten things, expedite things. There might be a request that we are supplying it and you accept it, and give a kind of certification that you have accepted. But you ask for the regulatory authority approval later, then only you accept that. So otherwise, after all the things are in place, then the question of getting into the trial and getting the patients, calling the patients for participation in the trial, there also you may have to also submit with the ethics committee the source of your trial participants, and how you are going to get access to them. So once you start this, then you have to have a team in place, and that team should function regularly and with close liaison with each other. So one of the most important person in the team at the site is the coordinator, study coordinator. So study coordinator should be a skilled person and rather an experienced person, and their many of the burden of or responsibilities of the investigator is truly speaking shared by the coordinator, study coordinator. There could be more than one study coordinator also for a given study. Okay, and depending on the nature of the study, there will be many other kind of support staff. Like usually there is a study nurse. The concept of study nurse is not that popular in India, but in Europe and US, it is a must almost, that the handling of the investigational product is done best by the study nurse. Okay, and for storage and accountability of the investigational product is done by a pharmacist, a trained pharmacist. So these are some of the, and then if there is a necessity of collecting blood samples, etc., there should be a phlebotomist or a laboratory technician in your team. So it is an expanded team, and the different people have their different specific responsibilities and skill set. And although the final responsibility and obligation lies with the principal investigator, and all these people who will be participating, acting as a member of the team, they need also to be adequately trained to the protocol, the and each and every aspect of the protocol. Okay, and they should be given categorically, okay, responsibilities, and that is what is called the delegation of responsibilities. And those responsibilities are delegated to the different members of the study team, and that has also to be properly documented. And this is actually done on the day of site initiation. So site initiation means the day in which the site is formally declared to be ready and to go for randomization. Not necessarily on the day of site initiation the first patient is to be randomized, but that is a formal way of declaring that yes, this site is ready for randomizing patients or recruiting patients. And during that site initiation visit, it is the responsibility of the sponsor to send their representative, usually a monitor, study monitor, who will come, or maybe more than one person will come and train all the study team members. And also, if some of them do not have the GCP training, they will also provide GCP training at that time. And at that opportunity itself, occasion itself, they will also uh, 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 catalyze the process of delegation of responsibilities to all these site members. And all this is the responsibility is actually the PI's responsibility. The site, the delegation of duties to the different members, it is the PI's responsibilities. So the date and the delegation date is to be also mentioned, and the signature of the PI real-time signature is should be there. And then the study starts, and on daily basis all the documentation are to be properly maintained. The study team works, and there might be PI may be too busy with many other commitments, so he could also take some co-investigator, sub-investigator, co-principal investigator, etc., etc. And PI also delegates some of the responsibility to these co-investigators, but everything is to be written, documented. And then there might be also periodically the monitor, who is a representative of the sponsor, would be visiting the site and try to oversee how things are moving. And these days, of course, remote site monitoring taking place, online monitoring, and a regular or more continuous kind of monitoring is taking place. And depending on the project, sometimes all the data collection forms are checked by the monitor, or sample of them, a few of them are checked by the monitor. So that's how it goes. But the responsibility of getting things properly documented and trial being conducted properly with proper attention to the interest of the volunteers, etc., all these are guided by the monitor on a regular basis. And the coordinator at the site, coordinator is appointed by the investigator, and monitor is appointed by the sponsor. Dr. Shambo was discussing. So that's how it goes. And if there is any volunteer who suffers from any serious adverse event, that has to be properly managed expeditiously. If it is serious, it is to be expeditiously reported within 24 hours of the occurrence, and or of the awareness of the investigator about this occurrence. So it has to be intimated the first report, expedited, that may be a brief report, which is to be followed by a more detailed report. That could be follow-up report, there could be follow-up 1, follow-up 2 reports, and then say final report, serious adverse event reporting. The investigator is to report it to the ethics committee, local ethics committee, to the sponsor, and also to the regulator. And then investigator also has to comment on the relatedness of the serious adverse event, relatedness to the participation of the trial, and in case it is found to be related. And there are also different regulatory guidance document or regulatory the clause in the regulation, which will guide how to go for this relatedness assessment. And the investigator is supposed to follow that and accordingly give his opinion and the reasoning why he is considering it related or not related. If it is related, then the volunteer is entitled to get compensation for it. Besides that, even before that, the investigator has a responsibility to treat and manage the serious adverse event without any out-of-pocket expense on the part of the participant. So that's how it goes. And then there might be also audit, there might be also regulatory inspection. The investigator should mentally be ready and otherwise logistically be prepared to face these audit and inspection, regulatory inspection. And there will be also during the if the project continues for a year, there might be more than once usually more than once the monitor will come, because the monitor is supposed to look into the quality conduct of the trial the whole of the trial. If there are at that site, if there are say 30 volunteers, the participation of all these 30 volunteers along with all the documents related to the 30 participants, 30 volunteers, they are to be checked by the monitor. Towards the end, if the study has ended, okay, then it is the responsibility of the sponsor and the monitor sent by the sponsor. They will come, see everything, and then will declare a closeout and also ensure the arrangements for archival. But it is the responsibility of the principal investigator to organize the archival, but real responsibility of archival lies with the hospital administration. Sometimes in some hospital there is space crunch for storage, etc. In that case, the hospital administration or on behalf of the hospital, the investigator should foresee that and accordingly negotiate with the sponsor at the beginning itself, negotiate with the sponsor to provide extra fund, whereby this archival business of the trial related documents, they can be otherwise outsourced to a third party, which on behalf of the institution will preserve the trial related documents for a period of 15 years as required by the new drugs and clinical trial rules. Ethics committee related documents are to be preserved for a period of 5 years at least. So that's how the archival part goes. The responsibility of the archival, truly speaking, lies with the ethics committee on one hand, and the investigator related documents, their archival is the responsibility of the institute head of administration. So the institute head of administration may retire in a couple of years or transfer, but that doesn't mean that the archival responsibility can be discontinued. So next, whosoever assumes the chair, it becomes his or her responsibility. That's how it goes. So this is in a nutshell what happens in a study site, okay, and how as investigator we should prepare ourselves to responsibly conduct a clinical trial, keeping liaison constantly with the ethics committee and the site administration or institution head, at the same time with the study monitor and the sponsor or the CRO, okay, appointed by the sponsor. So I can stop here and we'll seek if there are any questions, comments, critical comments. You can type it in the chat box. In the interest of time, it may not be possible to continue the discussion further, but I can promise that I'll request InnovoCare e-Academy to create a WhatsApp group of all the people who participated today, and keeping that WhatsApp group alive for at least 7 days until you give the certificate. The certificate will be given within 7 days. So during these 5 or 6 days, if you send message with questions, comments, we can, myself and Dr. Shambo will try to respond to them to the best of our ability. With this, I thank you profusely for being patiently listening to. But then I would say the real taste of pudding is in eating. So try to lay your hands, try to gain experience, try to conduct a couple of trials, and then we'll be learning it much better as compared to just listening to a didactic lecture like this. Thank you very much again, and I think I can stop here. I now hand over to Dr. Shambo or to Rohan to have the concluding remarks and call it a day. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Over, Dr. Shambo.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I think we can conclude here, and as sir has mentioned, if you have any questions or doubts, you can put in that particular WhatsApp group, which is a temporary WhatsApp group for next 5 or 7 days, so that we can answer, we can make our comments. Along with that, may I request now Mr. Rohan Tripathi to have his concluding remarks and to finish today's program.
Is Rohan there to say the concluding remarks? or you can, Dr. Shambo, you can conclude it.
Yes, sir. Rohan is there.
Okay, over to Rohan.
I would love to thank all our guests who have been kind enough to be part of this evening.
I think, Rohan, there is some technical glitch from your side. There is something that's happening.
Yeah, I cannot also hear Rohan.
Yeah. So I think on behalf of Ainobor Care E-Academy, I want to thank you all. May I request Dr. Orno Bhattacharya, who is there, to say a couple of words. Dr. Bhattacharya?
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. Please.
Yeah.
And I also request other dignitaries who are delegates who are present today. They can unmute themselves and can have some comments. Yeah. We can hear you, Dr. Bhattacharya. Please. Hello, Dr. Bhattacharya. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Now we can hear you.
Thank you, Dr. Samajdar. And thank you, sir, Professor Tripathi, for a nice meet. And we have got a very knowledgeable discussion. So we have learned a lot, but as time goes, some of these concepts may fade. So it's my earnest request to the organizing committee to post some of the slides. The slides are very good in the WhatsApp group, so that we can have a look from time to time, because the slides are a quick review, very quick review over the pre-course materials. I have gone through some of the pre-course materials, and the slides are very good. So it's my earnest request to the organizing committee.
What we can do, we have a recording. So also that recording I can share with you. You can check.
That will be excellent.
Yeah.
Dr. Haldar is also with me. Dr. Sushovan Haldar.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments?
Yeah.
The recording will be okay. If you can share.
Yeah. We can provide that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again. Thank you all. Again, we are really thankful to all the delegates to have their patience hearing, and also I am really glad to tell that Ainobor Care E-Academy, who are organizing fantastic events virtually, they had done today also a very good job as per their technical things. So really thankful to Mr. Rohan Tripathi for conducting this webinar. So with that, I again thank you all. Good night. Good night all.
Okay.
Good night, everybody. Thank you all.
Good night.